Go ahead and get started, even though folks may still be wandering in, and even though our water delivery has not happened yet, but we're got the thumbs up, so that's a real prospect for our panelists today. Good afternoon, everyone. Anin, greetings to our University of Minnesota students, colleagues, our friends. I think this is going to be a really wonderful afternoon for us, and I feel really fortunate to be here with all of you. I'm Brenda Child, and I'm a professor, and I'm the chair of the Department of American Studies here at the university and in the college. I also work in another department, the American Indian Studies Department, here in the College of Liberal Arts. I'm also a member of the Board of Trustees of the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian, and some of our staff and even our director, Kevin Gover, will be wandering in probably in a few minutes. And I want to welcome those folks as well, including a number of our Board of Trustees who are with us today for the symposium and the longer event this afternoon. They had a little tour of the Walker, and we're over there this morning, and so they're kind of on their way over here. The symposium today is being hosted by the Department of American Studies with support from the Departments of American Indian Studies, the Department of History, the new RIGS initiative at the University of Minnesota, which means race, indigeneity, gender, sexuality, as well as the university's Office of Equity and Diversity, and I'd like to thank them all for their support. This is also is a symposium of the National Museum of the American Indian, Smithsonian. Of course, events like this are usually held in Washington, D.C. I don't know, David Penny's here, I don't know if we've ever held a symposium before on a college campus, so we're very happy that we're the chosen university for this event. But when the board was talking last spring about what should be our symposia for the coming year, we were thinking about activism, and so we were able to combine a Board of Trustees visit to Minneapolis along with this symposium here at the university, and everyone on the board agreed that this is the perfect place to come and talk about activism in Minnesota, and especially here in Minneapolis. So, when I see that Kevin has wandered in, when Kevin Gover and NMAI's Board of Trustees knew we would be in Minneapolis, we decided, the theme of this particular symposium, because of recent events, we'd all been thinking in recent years about Idle No More. Of course, we've been thinking very closely about Standing Rock. Many of our students from the university visited Standing Rock and spent time there. And also, we have this, as I say, very rich kind of history in the Minneapolis community and in greater Minnesota, a long tradition and history of very interesting activism as one of the sort of centers of this kind of work in Indian country. So we invited our speakers and our panelists to reflect on their own philosophies of activism. Kevin wanted to be sure that we're not just thinking about what we're doing, our own personal activists and work that we're doing, but that people kind of reflect on the meaning of activism, how people are viewing activism in both the short and the long term, and also a kind of interesting and related issue is how do they judge success? What happens when activist efforts appear to, for the time being anyway, fail? What about short-term failures or long-term successes, and how are folks reflecting on those things? And also, how do the folks that are here today incorporate activism into their careers, into their art, and into their labor? We also considered the idea of generation, right? That the generation before me may think differently about activism. My generation may have certain set ideas about this. But I wanted to think about, too, the generation who are kind of emerging or have emerged as activists and leaders in various ways in our communities. I also wanted to be able to address this not just from the perspective of the urban environment. We tend to think of activism as something that happens in the city, but of course that's not true. A lot of the focus of indigenous activism is in rural communities or in reservation spaces. So how do we view those things? And I remember kind of when I first came to the University of Minnesota. This was over 20 years ago, so I was more like their age when I came to the university. And I happened to come in at the same year as a new dean arrived. And he was a younger person who became dean at that particular time. And he'd come from another university as I had as well. And we were kind of very excited to be here, and we liked the moment very much. We were both very happy to be arriving at the University of Minnesota at that particular time. And I remember he kind of turned to me and said, "It's our turn." And I thought to myself, what the heck? I just wanted to be a scholar and a teacher. And I thought, what does he mean by it's our turn? And I had a while to kind of think about that idea over the years and kind of what leadership might mean, because it may be that we're not just in the university scholars, historians like me, but we have very complex lives. And some of that may include activist work and bringing attention to those particular issues. So this is kind of what I would say to this group. It's their turn, right? So we want to hear from folks that are very involved in their communities and are kind of shaping our agendas for the next few years. At the same time, we want to hear from more established folks, and we have two very distinguished people, individuals, very distinctive voices. And so at 3 o'clock, we'll be hearing from Louise Erdrich and Edgar Heapabirds. So that's how we're going to spend the rest of our day after the first panel. So it's really my sincere pleasure to be able to introduce this panel. And I would just say to you all, these are some of my favorite colleagues, some of my favorite people in Minnesota and beyond. I admire very much the work that they're doing. First of all, Nick Estes has been very gracious and agreed to be our moderator. He's a graduate student finishing up his PhD very, very soon at the University of New Mexico. He also has a book that will be forthcoming about activism, taking a very long view, like how we ended up at Standing Rock and what preceded Standing Rock for the last 200 years before that. He's currently the Charles Warren Fellow at Harvard University. We also have another PhD from American Studies, this one from the University of Minnesota, Kate Bean, who is part of the American Indian Initiatives program, and she's the outreach manager for the Minnesota Historical Society. Everyone will get a chance to introduce themselves as well. Also, Melissa Boyd is a member of the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe. She's a 2017 Bush Foundation Fellow here in Minnesota. I guess the thing I would just say about Melissa is that she teaches Ojibwe language to everyone she meets. Sometimes that's preschoolers, as one of the pioneering folks who started the 3-year-old immersion program up at Mille Lacs. But she also teaches adults who work in the corporate offices at Mille Lacs as well. So she'll be talking about her work and how she's spending her Bush Fellowship year. Bradley Harrington is the new Commissioner of Natural Resources for the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe. And the reason I have invited Brad, for a whole lot of reasons, but he's obviously been a very important emerging leader in recent years at Mille Lacs. But he brings a particularly Ojibwe cultural point of view to his work in natural resources for the Mille Lacs Band. And then Rory Wakemup, I was saying he's W, so he gets to go last. He is an artist, as you can see from his attire, who is kind of shaking things up on Franklin Avenue as the director of the All My Relations Gallery in the neighborhood. Rory caught my attention for a number of reasons. One that I have to mention is that his MFA exhibition at the University of Wisconsin had a fabulous title, which was "Kill the Idiot, Save the Fan." Like Rory, all of our speakers today have a unique voice on things. They're people with amazing and deeply meaningful careers and experiences that have pushed us to think critically about American Indian and Indigenous peoples and their lives, history, and their present-day concerns. So I'll turn it over to Nick, and thank you all for being here.
Hamatakiapi nape chuzapi chante washte. I'm just gonna, actually have each of our panelists introduce themselves for 5 to 6 minutes, and then we'll go into a discussion to address some of the questions that Dr. Childs has brought up. So I guess we'll just start with, since we're going alphabetically, I'll just pass it to my left.
Hamitake pi Kate Bine Makiapi Ahedi Piwinde Mie Yushkan Wechiankapi Perewa Kanton Hemacha Damakota Wakapai Pakshan Edo Omaapi. Hello, my relatives. My name is Kate Bean. I'm also known as Brings Them Home Woman. I am enrolled at Flandreau, Santi Dakota Nation in South Dakota. I'm Berewa Kanton Dakota, and I'm happy to see you all here today. I've lived here in Minnesota, in our homeland, for on and off for roughly maybe 12 years. I see my twin sister, so I'm asking her. So around 12 years. But I've sort of been in and out a lot, living in other places. But our family are among those that were exiled from the state after the Dakota War of 1862. I'm the granddaughter, we're the granddaughters of Makpiwi Chashta, Cloudman, who had a village called Heato Tue, which was over by a lake that we call Bude Makaska, but which people used to call Lake Calhoun. And I say that because part of the work that my sister and I do, and that we do with our father and with our family, is we're working to restore and reclaim the name of the lake that our family lived at. And that's part of, I think, why I was asked to come here today, was to talk about our sort of activism work around that. I also work for the Minnesota Historical Society for a new team called the Native American Initiatives team. It was originally called American Indian Initiatives, and now it's called Native American Initiatives. But within that role, I work a lot to build education within the state about Dakota people, acknowledgement about Dakota people, and also to help with advocating for my community, advocating for access to sacred spaces and to sites that are managed by the Minnesota Historical Society. So I really see myself as an advocate within the institution. That being said, my work at Bede Makaska is outside of the work I do at the Minnesota Historical Society, so I have to sort of put that little disclaimer out there that I'm not here today necessarily speaking as a representative of the Minnesota Historical Society. I'm speaking as a Dakota community member, but at the same time, I can't separate myself. And so I'm just being open and honest about that. And so far, I've worked at the institution a couple of years, and they've been pretty supportive of my feelings on that. So we're going to continue with that. So I'm the grandfather of the granddaughter of Makpiwi Chashta. Another one of my grandfathers was Ohiesa, or Charles Eastman, who I really see as an activist in his time. He was the second medical physician, Native American medical physician. He missed being the first by a matter of a couple months, but it was a woman who was the first, so I'm happy about that. And he really was an advocate for Dakota people. He was the only physician at the Wounded Knee Massacre in 1890, and he lobbied and advocated for American Indian people and was a public speaker and a writer and just a real scholarly thinker. Who advocated for our people and who told our stories and preserved a lot of our cultural knowledge and our stories in writing. So he was one of the first people in our family to really begin that process of writing. And so I come from a family that's heavily archived. I come from a family that, I can go into museums and libraries and pull out the paperwork that talk about the roles that my family members played in community as leaders. But when I look at a lot of the writing that's been done over the years, it doesn't match up with the way I was taught about these people growing up. And so that's why I, decided to get an education so that I could try and write about my family and speak about our roles as leaders, both inside Minnesota and outside of Minnesota, in an indigenous way, in a Dakota way, in a human way. And so that's where I came here to the University of Minnesota, got my bachelor's in American Indian Studies with a focus on Dakota language. I studied at Auckland University and then came back and was a Dakota language immersion teacher. And so my work is really rooted in community and in the community work that I did. I worked as an after-school mentor with kids. I worked in the community for many, many years before finishing my degree and going on to working on my PhD, which was in American Studies, where I essentially, my dissertation told the history of my family through the Dakota War from our perspective, and gave an example of one family's story through time to sort of humanize that history. And for that, I went through the archives and picked out some information about our family in the archives, but paired it with oral histories and personal family letters that we had in our family. And so it was a family. It was a family project. And so that's some of the work I do. At the Minnesota Historical Society, I work as an advocate. I work with TIPOs, Tribal Historic Preservation Officers. Every day is different. I'm working right now a lot on Fort Snelling, which is a difficult space to think about and try and sort of re-envision. So that's a little bit about what I do. Pidamaya.
Anin babi tagi jugukoi indijigi kenemigo minoa with the Mrs. Aga igening unchbayan. Ishwachiwa gingyo nini jana sinanig indayawananig. I'm Melissa Boyd, and I'm really happy to be here and happy to be asked to come and speak today. I am a 2017 Bush Fellow, and just a little bit about myself. I'm a partner to Bradley, and we care for 8 children. And we both work and live on the reservation in Mille Lacs, located about an hour and a half north of here in central Minnesota. My experience in activism hasn't been always, I haven't always been aware that I was an activist. As many people probably aren't. But my journey and my own education and led me to the place that I am today. A little bit about that. I was raised in a small rural town in northern Minnesota. The population was majority Caucasian, and I gotta say that I just did everything I could to assimilate and to get through the education system there. And I made it by the skin of my teeth, right, to graduate. And I thought, I was gonna be the first one to go to college out of my family. And when I went into the college and university systems, I did not feel very welcome. I did not feel very supported. I was not taught or conditioned to be an academic in any way. And so I quickly returned home within a year or so. And in that short experience there at college, I learned that I was pretty good at learning Ojibwe. And I really enjoyed that. And I didn't get that in my K-12 education. And so what had happened was, I was asked to be a part of a master apprentice program, and I spent the majority of a decade working with fluent speakers and spiritual advisors from the community. And I didn't feel a need to go back to school, or I was so content working with these fluent speakers and learning these things about being an Anishinaabe person. And one of the things that they teach us, the spiritual advisors there in Mille Lacs, his name is Obazan. One of the things that he teaches us is that we are so far gone from ourselves as in a spiritual place that he calls it spiritual bankruptcy. And we're not really aware as a people where that comes from, how do we address it, and how do we reincorporate that, because we've all moved through mainstream systems and we're working and we're going to school, and we kind of left ourselves as an Anishinaabe people. And so through the course of that decade, I was reconditioned and taught about how to take care of myself spiritually and how to help people in a grieving place. We spent a lot of our time doing funerals and naming ceremonies, you name it, from birth to death. We were helping address the needs of the community through that. And as I was coming to an end in my master apprenticeship, I was realizing that all the things that I was being taught with these fluent speakers, these native elders, none of those things were lining up in our education system. And so we moved on to start an immersion program after the apprenticeship. And I gotta say that even though I had a good handle on the language and a lot of the cultural practices to begin renormalizing that, we had administratively, I wasn't able to make a lot of progress, not having those technical skills and those things that you get from a good college education, right? And so I applied for the Bush Fellowship, and there I am working towards finishing my degree, my undergraduate degree, and also I'll be working with an MD from Stanford Medical School about behavior design, because I really believe that when we change the way we think about language and trying to fit it into our day, we have to make adjustments to our default behaviors and the things that we go to, so that we can kind of reprogram ourselves to incorporate language in our spiritual self into our day. And the other portion of my fellowship is going to be working with the Hawaiian Nation. They went from 500 fluent speakers to 20,000 fluent speakers since 1985. And so with that, I want to study the systemic changes that happened in their political system, education system, so that they were able to hold revitalization in those spaces. And I want to know, what does that look like for us in Minnesota? What does that look like for the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe? And ultimately, I want to hear little children speak Ojibwe all day and renormalize that. So with that, miigwech for listening. And
Anin, Najake Wasang and Dijnakas, Megizi and Dude, Mia Mamissaga Gunning Wange Bayan. My name is Brad Harrington. I'm from the Mille Lacs Indian Reservation, and I'm the current Commissioner of Natural Resources for the Mille Lacs Band. And I got this job just by, I guess you could call it being an activist. A little over 5 years ago, August 1st of 2012, I was released from prison for the second time on my way home back to the reservation with only the thought and determination to do something different than live my life as I have been living it. So I went back and I started seeking out the language. I knew that was important. I had something deep inside me. My Anishinaabe spirit was just crying out for the Ojibwe language. I exposed myself to some language and history while I was in prison, and when I got out, I knew that was very, very important for me to continue on with. So I had to go to ceremonies because that was one of the main places where the language was spoken. Ceremonies included namings, invocations, but then also funerals and medicine lodge, a day when they call it. So over the course of the last 5 years, that's what I've been studying. And I worked in natural resources 5 years ago also as a job. And I was working in the Anishinaabe portion of it, the Ojibwe portion of natural resources. The mission statement was to include traditional cultural practices. And the current DNR at the time did not have that included. I went back to college to study in natural resources, but I was also learning the Ojibwe language and ceremony at the same time. And they were conflicting ideas on how to observe the natural world in which we live. I can recall the day that I decided I was not going to go to college anymore, that I was going to pursue the Ojibwe language and culture and ceremony full-time. was midterms last spring. I was on my way to do mammology midterm. I got a call from Obzon, the guy that I've been learning language and ceremonies from, to go do a naming ceremony. And I had to tell him, nope, going. I got to go take this test. It's very important. I'm going to reflect on my grade. So as I was taking the test, doing the scientific names of small mammals, I remember sitting there thinking I'm missing a heck of an opportunity here by learning from someone that's willing to teach me Ojibwe, teach me how to do a ceremony. I'm really missing out an opportunity on learning Ojibwe and learning an Ojibwe ceremony. And then I was understanding what those men were talking about more. Every time they talked about their tobacco, offering their same amount of food, they would offer it to the lakes, the animals, the land, air, water, everything that the money do have given us. And I was like, that's Anishinaabe natural resources. And then I heard an excerpt from Brenda's book, The Grandfather's Knocking Sticks, where John Nichols had a testimony in the Mille Lacs Band versus the United States Supreme Court case, where a translation of the treaty was Wenji Bima Dizi Young. And what that says, from where we get life. And I was like, that's Anishinaabe natural resources. So I was involved in pretty much every committee that my community offered. Powwow Committee, Early Ed Parent Committee, Indian Education Parent Committee for the public school. And I had to constantly bring up Ojibwe language, Ojibwe culture. I felt that was my job. So I went to the chief, made sure that Ojibwe language and Ojibwe culture were brought up. I went to our other elected officials, and I guess I did it so much that they finally said, well, with your perspective as Anishinaabe natural resources, how about you just run our natural resource department? I agreed. Reluctantly. I knew the sacrifices I was going to have to make, not only for my family, but to my community. Because it's not just bringing back, physical practices. It's bringing back a lifestyle, a way of thinking, a perspective on life that would greatly increase the chances of an Anishinaabe person knowing and nourishing his Anishinaabe spirit, which to me would have vast effects on the world. Anishinaabe people won't be graduating at 50%. They may be graduating at more. Anishinaabe people won't be the 10% of the population in prison in Minnesota, while only being 1% of the total population of Minnesota. And I'll end on one more statistic. I like thinking on statistics. When it came to American education, 50% of Native Americans graduate in Minnesota from high school. Even less go on to college, and I admire those people. If it wasn't for them, it wouldn't be for people like me without a degree to even have a voice. I believe it's the people with the education that spearheaded and got Indian people into decision-making tables. That's where some of my power was received. But also that 70% of Indians in prison have a high school diploma. So the whole thing of graduating high school and you're going to live a good life, which what I was told, and I didn't really believe I was worthy of it. That's another statement that needs to get put out there. So, miigwech.
If I plug this into the USB, or the HDMI, would it get imagery on the screen? So otherwise, you need a really good imagination to. Yeah.
I think it's.
Yeah, it's on the other side.
Okay.
Sorry. Yep. Is that the same size as the PC ones? Oh, nice. I love cross-platform stuff. Nindijna Kazbadaban, Nindu De Makwa. My name is Rory Erler Wakemup. I was born in St. Paul, raised in Minneapolis up until 8th grade, and then moved to the Lower Sioux Reservation for high school. Went to the U of M for a little while. And then the Institute of American Indian Arts, then some community colleges, and then UW-Madison for grad school. Professional student, like I think 13 years of studio arts credits in Native history and environmental studies. So with that, right now I'm currently the director of the All My Relations Arts Gallery, and Deani Whitehawk is here. She kind of set the stage for the place to be sorry, I forgot to start my timer. For the gallery to be not just a gallery, but like a sacred space and a neutral space for the community to interact and host meetings. And what I'm adding to it is an element of involving artists with community for direct action. So this here, if you get the links later, I incorporated one of our artists was in our On Fertile Ground show last fall that was doing an artist residency at the Institute of American Indian Arts and did a call out for mirror shields. So I got our community involved with collaboration with Forecast Public Art, and we made 500 of them and did a water serpent performance at Standing Rock. So performances, I like that humanize us. And this is Miko Sampson. He worked with me in my other hat, Wake 'em Up Productions, and wanted to get involved in community actions and art. So as All My Relations Arts Gallery Director, I was empowered to help him write a grant and get a state arts board grant to work with youth in the community in Anishinaabe Academy. And we worked with Francis Yell and Gordon Coons, that's us at Anishinaabe Academy. We had about 40 youth, and we were awarded the first place float winner in the Circle magazine. So it was nice to give youth some recognition in the arts. And I should also mention that the Mirror Shields performance got into Public Art and Review, Forecast Public Arts International magazine. So it was nice to help one of our artists get some international recognition as well. So our most recent show with Karen Savage and John Thunder, and for their community workshop, we painted a banner for Open Streets for No Line 3. It helped raise awareness. So a lot of folks that came by to paint didn't really know what was going on up there. And so I think about 20 folks from the community helped us paint this banner that we're going to use for a march on Indigenous Peoples Day, October 9th. Shameless plug. So Wake 'em Up Productions, I like to consider it art therapy for the community, fun activism or functivism, and a way for us to present ourselves in the 21st century, and tell our own story in pop culture. And it kind of plays with the gray areas of what's appropriate or not. But either way, it's better than just allowing others to dehumanize us through their portrayals. So with these outfits, I work with youth, and we battle offensive mascots in my campaign to kill the idiot, save the fan. That's a parody on Colonel Henry Pratt's phrase, kill the Indian, save the man. And the next project coming up, is the evolution of ledger art, where I'm using appropriating Minecraft for, and if you don't know what that is, that's where you create your own worlds and whatnot. So I'm taking that into the real world where we can manifest our own destinies and have these battles with natives and settlers joining forces to kind of LARP style, live action role play battle, tyrants from history and present day tyrants as well. And then what I like to call my Miss America log line is that I like to collaborate with artists like Paintbrushes and work with our community as our palette, and together paint the world with activism. So yeah, nice. Under 5 minutes. Thank you.
Right on. I just want to make some brief comments about who I am, but this panel isn't about me. It's about these wonderful artists, activists, educators, policymakers, change makers, organizers, etc., historians. Yay, history. So I am a citizen of the Lower Brule Sioux tribe, but one of the things that's really fascinating about being here, I've never actually spent a lot of time in the Twin Cities or Minnesota for that matter, but my great-great-grandmother, Melissa Dufond, was orphaned by the 1862 U.S. Dakota War. Her ancestor, or her mothers and father, her entire family was killed off. We have no connection to Dakota Makoche out here. So we don't know that line, but they were taken in as relatives as prisoners of war, at Crow Creek in South Dakota. So, but then we became Lakota. We became better. No, just kidding. So it's all good. No, I was just kidding. But one of the things I was thinking about when I was listening to everyone talk, but also when Brenda was introducing this panel, and we think about sort of contemporary movements such as Idle No More and Standing Rock, and one of the things that came to my mind right away was that each of those movements was led by Native women. And I don't think that gets recognized enough. And on top of that, if we look to Standing Rock itself, Sacred Stone Camp, for those of you that don't know, was created and founded by LaDonna Bravebolt Allard, who was a TIPO officer, a Tribal Historic Preservation Officer. So yeah, we're some radical folks, historians. And another thing that I was thinking about after listening to Roy's presentation was the central role of youth in each of these movements, whether it was Idle No More or Standing Rocks. I'm going to be a Lakota chauvinist and just speak about our movements, but from Standing Rock, the Respect Our Water ran, thousands and thousands of miles across the country to reservations to spread the word of Standing Rock. And had it not been for the youth, I don't think that movement would have gained the kind of notoriety it did. And I just want to give a shout out to the role that they played. People like Bobby Jean, Three Legs, a former student of mine, Joseph White Eyes, as well as Jason Charger and Zaisha Grinnell, people that I've worked with in the past. And it made me think about what Roy was talking about, and also this notion of how we think about history and sort of this longer generational thing that we're calling activism. And I think of I always go back to the ghost dance, and thinking about 1890 and the Wounded Knee Massacre. And oftentimes we think of that as tragedy, and I want to reshape that sort of framing and think about it as a moment of liberation and a moment of like a movement. It's part of our social movement or indigenous movement history. And I say that because it was actually a movement that took off because of youth. And we don't think about that when we think about the ghost dance. It was boarding school youth who dropped out of ran away from boarding school and were translating ghost dance songs and spreading the message of the prophet because they could speak both in English and in Lakota, and they could write in Lakota and they could write in English. And if you go back to Charles Mooney's manuscript, The Ghost Dance Religion, he documents that, and he talks about ghost dance leaders as being these runaway youth from boarding schools. And so I just wanted to put that plug in there because we often think of that as tragedy, but in fact it was a profound moment of resistance and a profound moment of liberation, and we can see that whether it's in the ghost dance or whether it's in I Don't Know More or Standing Rock. So those sort of traditions carry through. So now to turn back, I kind of want to do like a little open sort of dialogue with you all, because you all raised some really great points, and maybe we can speak to each other on this panel in sort of a conversational style. But one of the questions that Brenda brought up is, what does Native activism mean to this generation, especially when we think of the long arc of history, right? Indigenous peoples are long-memoried people. We have memories going back centuries and centuries and centuries. So what does it mean, and what's different about this particular era? Because one of the things that Melissa was talking about, that Kate was talking about, is that they didn't really consider themselves activists, and they were just doing the work, and then they kind of landed these jobs. So what does Native activism mean to this particular generation when we think about sort of the long arc of history and the work that we're doing? So I'll just open it up to Melissa.
One of the points that I wanted to make when I was asked to speak on activism, and when I thought about what it meant to me, was that it all started out with fulfilling a need and trying to meet the needs of the children, whether they be spiritual or academic, is creating a safe space for them. And as you show up more and more, you develop your skills and what you can offer the children. I found that activism turned into advocacy, and being able to communicate the needs of the children and the needs of the community to the people that actually made the policies. And so I feel that activism for me is about responsibility and communicating the needs of others and making sure that those needs are heard, so that we can raise, a higher quality of life for the community. So.
Can I add on to that? In the long arc of history, like just our existence is resistance, and looking in like the closer in the last like 40 years, getting our religious freedoms and language and culture back and legal. I think that's their work is direct action right now. It's continuing on that legacy, and instilling that in our youth and alternate ways to learn and educate ourselves outside of the traditional school setting, I guess, where they just teach a different history, I guess, for lack of a better term.
Well, and I think building off of what Rory says about building from legacies. My father was deeply involved in the Red Power movement. He was he's retired, but he still works full time, community organizer. And I think building off of what our parents and grandparents did and the work that they did and continuing that forward, and not, the work that my dad did was about building acknowledgement, building awareness. We were at that point in time where it's time for action. And so the work that we're trying to do, at least the work that I'm trying to do, is that we have to be everywhere. And I think that's part of why I was asked to be here today is that in the work that I do, I'm advocating for and creating public art at B'nai Makaska. I was very critical of the scaffold at the Walker. I have been a part of those activist movements and building awareness, but also doing something about it. So we will have art at B'nai Makaska next year. We will have a name change as of October 17th of next month, we're hoping, when the decision is being made. And so we're building off of the legacies of our ancestors and moving that forward to the next step, I think.
When I think of activism today, I think back on what our traditional lives look like. There's communal decision making on Ojibwe, in Ojibwe land, and then how would that look today? There was a disconnect from that. So now everything we do that's outside a normal stereotype is activism. So like my Niji here said, just being your Anishinaabe self is being an activist. But in today's world, you know, if you step outside of a box, even standing up for what's right makes you an activist. So how can we demonstrate that for future kids on doing it efficiently, respectfully, but also having the desired impact? That's very important, or else we're just gonna really not have the impact that we're looking for. I can go out, and it also has to be something you truly believe in. Like I went out because I truly believe in the Ojibwe language, I truly believe in the Ojibwe culture, and if I were to advocate for something else, be an activist for something else like breast cancer, I have not been personally touched by that. Although I can support it, I don't think I could be a really true activist for it because it doesn't touch me personally. So it's like finding what's really what's really yours, what you really want to take responsibility for, and how you're going to communicate that, not just to other people, but communicate that with your life, to your family, to your deities, your gods, your spirits, and how would that look like, and how to pass that on to kids. I think that's what I consider activism today.
Cool. That kind of makes me think about something that Rory had said, and he said our very existence is resistance, and kind of what, to build off what all four of you had said, it was making me think that Indigenous peoples, our mere presence, you know, in spaces, whether it's at the university or even in our own communities, off the reservation, in a city, or even in organizing spaces, we are political by default, whether we choose to occupy those roles or not. And so that kind of brings me to my next question is, you know, what does community mean to you? And part of our conversation we had before this is kind of talking about the various roles in which we play, whether we think of ourselves as scholars or community organizers or activists or whatever that is, and sort of what are the tensions between those different spaces and those different roles that we occupy, whether it's in a classroom or whether it's on the reservation or off the reservation, and how do we negotiate that, and sort of the larger goal of when we're talking about sort of the philosophies of Native activism. If anyone wants to go first.
I'll try. I was describing actually last night of how community is kind of like this gelatinous mass to try to hurt, but then it's like within that, it's hurting all these cats in the same direction. But one of the, I guess this might be a little off point, but one of the things I found different between the generation in front of me and the generation behind me is the younger youth weren't really interested in the old school type of protest where you stand in front of a door and hold a sign. Or mascots, and I was kind of in the middle, like why do we care about mascots when we're still trying to recover from genocide and forced assimilation? Why don't we focus more on language and other such topics? But then through, I guess, fun activism, I got my own inner child out, and then now these youth that I'm working with anyway are ecstatic to battle mascots, and then through these fun activities, there's subversive ways to educate youth, to incorporate that in. So you're teaching without them even, well, they know about it, but it's, so there's kind of like, we have to go at a different angle with all the mass media and cell phones and instant gratification. We kind of got to morph with it, more fun and less work, I guess, or make the work fun. I don't know.
Well, I think when I think of community, that's such a broad term. And I know in our culture, you know, as a Dakota person married to a Lakota person, we have different tioshpaes or large family groups. And those of us, a lot of us have multiple tioshpaes now. You know, I have my tioshpae at Flandreau, but I have my Sundance tioshpae in Pine Ridge. I have my tioshpae in the, you know, the urban Indian community. So community means a lot of different things to different people. It's basically where you feel centered and get support, I think, in a lot of ways, and who you identify with, and it's really important to have that. But it's also, when I think about community, I think about the power of decision making and the power of the people having that power. And part of my work as a public historian is uplifting other people's voices. A lot of the work I do, I don't get credit for, and I don't care about the credit because it's about uplifting other people to do the work, and it's about acknowledging my community and acknowledging other voices and letting them speak up for themselves and letting us tell so that we can tell our own stories, advocating for ourselves. And so, you know, for Fort Snelling, for example, I created a Dakota Community Council, which is a council made of both tribal historic preservation officers, but also just regular community members. The TIPOs who are on our council are not on there as TIPOs. They're there as community members. And that's important because TIPOs have a particular political relationship to the institution I work at and to the state. Community members don't. And those of us who come from communities off reservation, you know, my community is in Flandreau. I can't vote in my tribal elections. I'm not represented in the city by my community in Flandreau. I don't have representation, so we have to represent ourselves a lot of the time, and we have to support each other in representing ourselves. And as Dakota people who are exiled from this area, which is our homeland, we don't have that representation. And so my work is in trying to build that and support it. And to me, that's community.
Good answer. Yeah. Community for me, I gotta say, it has to do with what kind of hats I wear. I belong to several different communities. I would say that I'm a Mille Lacs band member. I'm a Minnesotan. I work in the realm of language revitalization and heritage language renormalization. And so I have my community of colleagues and people that mentor me that I can tap into when I need something. And so also the international indigenous networks that help develop policies worldwide for language and cultural revitalization for indigenous peoples. And back home at Mille Lacs, we have 3 different districts. So I was raised in District 2, very small, very rural, and then I moved to the main district near Mille Lacs Lake, right on Mille Lacs Lake. And so I guess I'm missing my question, Nick. I'm telling you all these communities. What's that?
You're doing good.
Oh,
Just
good. Thank you. I'm gonna just pass the mic to Bradley. So. But I just wanted to say that I feel like I belong to many different communities, and I feel very supported in each one.
Yeah, how I think of communities, I'm, District 1, Mille Lacs. I call that my home community. But so when I think of communities, I think where it's a transfer of energy, whether you're contributing or drawing from. See, right now we're part of this community here at the Kaufman in the Mississippi room. We're transferring energy here, whether it be in the form of mental capacity or emotion or just thoughts. So wherever there's a transfer of energy, you're taking part in that particular community. See, like I can pass through Bloomington and not take part in that, so I wouldn't call myself a participant in that particular community. Or I could go sit and listen in at a seminar at the University of Minnesota, and I will be a part of that because I'm drawing energy from that, whether I choose to speak up or if I sit in the back and listen. So that's what I believe a community is. It's a place where energy is transferred, whether it's drawn or transmitted.
And one more. In the metro area, especially, I guess on Franklin being a hub of, I guess, just social activity and activism. Taylor Payer here at a show, Reframe, and it was reframing indigenous or native identities in the capital, and she invited folks from the community of multiple different racial backgrounds and invited them in for the show to reframe Minnesota. You know, what is our identity? And then beyond that, like in that evolutionary step at the gallery, with a show, The Spring Four Directions, it's coming to the space and collaborating with 4 other galleries, indigenous and native, inviting folks from just inviting folks that self-identify as indigenous and what that means in the 21st century, Earth First, language, ceremonies, including all these indigenous thought processes into our regular art activity. So it becomes community art is a way to leverage different communities to work together and build those bridges, I guess is.
Rory brought up the question of mascots, and I think, personally, I was growing up, I was a skeptic of like, oh, mascots, you change it, it doesn't change, doesn't turn on the lights, it doesn't stop the violence. But one thing that I think Amanda Blackhorse has so powerfully demonstrated in the new film, Not a Mascot or Not Your Mascot, that has come out by More Than Just a Word, thank you, has powerfully demonstrated is that the mascot issue has galvanized millions of people, and it gives us an opportunity and a platform to talk about other things, right? And I was thinking about, Brenda had brought up this question when she was framing this panel about how do we measure success and failure? And, the Supreme Court made a ruling on a decision about a different thing that impacted the Washington football team decision, which could be read as a failure on our part, right? A defeat. But I would argue that with the film that just came out, and John Little's in the room as well. So I just want to say that with the sort of momentum that was built around the mascot issue, we can start talking about other things. And if we look to Standing Rock as well, they didn't stop the pipeline, but something else happened. And so I want to throw that back at the panel, because each of you have been talking about sort of personal challenges that you face. Bradley, you were talking about what it's like to come out of prison and then reconnect with your community. And other people have been talking about, sort of the challenges of like, how do we make change within these institutions? And so what are your sort of visions of failure and success in both the short term and the long term? And how do you see it playing out in the current work that you do? And I guess we could just start with Bradley.
Oh, well, when I think about failures and successes, I'm not going to go the rest of my life here without failing again. It's going to happen. But is it really going to be a failure if I learn from it? That's something my Nija here was talking about is, things that start up, go for a little while and then fade out. Is that really a failure if it resulted in other positive consequences that go on? One of my failures, I guess, is dropping out of college. I can consider that a failure. It was a decision that I made, and although it wasn't taken lightly, it was a really big decision. I made it rather easily because of what I was going to gain by having that time to learn more Ojibwe, learn the ceremonies. I can hold a fair conversation today, and I give that to, you know, my decision to drop out of college. And whether I'm going to go back, you know, I do have plans to go back to college, but I still got other work to do. And I'm just following what feels right for me. And I'm doing it all through, through the assimilated lens that I'm trying to break through by taking part in my ceremonies. When I'm coming into making a decision earlier this year, I went and fasted. I was supposed to go a few years ago, get put out in the woods and fast for 4 days by this old man. Then he passed away last year, and that hurt me. That was a failure. And I didn't learn from it because it happened again. Another old man was supposed to put me out earlier this year, and he passed away earlier this year, so that's another failure. So rather than going on and letting that be my life, I went out back in May, March, April. It was a little cold. But I was put out there for 4 days and 4 nights with no food and no water. And I just asked, I was like, am I doing the right thing for me today? And please guide me in the future to be able to recognize when I'm doing wrong and when I am doing right. And shortly after that, this job came up, something that I thought I wouldn't have for another decade. I was still working on my Anishinaabe perspective, which had its failures because I wasn't taking in the whole thought of a communal perspective on Ojibwe traditionalism. So, well, how am I going to measure my success? I don't think I'm going to be able to focus on that. Like, how do I measure success? I know I'm going to grow, so that can be a success. I may be able to transfer and express my opinion when it comes to Ojibwe traditionalism. That's a success. 5 years ago, I wouldn't be able to stammer through 2 sentences in front of all of you. But today, I'm able to sit here and speak and really express my views. And I think it's because I'm nourishing my Anishinaabe spirit through what the Anishinaabe were given. That's what I call Anishinaabe natural resources, everything that the Anishinaabe was given to nurture that spirit. Before, even 10 years ago, I can say, yeah, I'm Ojibwe. But I was just Ojibwe in the physical form. I was not nourishing my Anishinaabe spirit. So nourishing my Anishinaabe spirit, I think, is what the old man would say when I pass on, continually nourishing my Anishinaabe spirit, I would then reach Anishinaabe success. Passing on knowing that I fulfilled my role in this world and left the mark that I was meant to leave. So that's what I think about.
Well, when I think about success and failure, for success, I think about my children. You know, I thought I was a success last week when my daughter told me that she wanted to be a doctor like mom, and then I realized she was talking about Dr. McStuffins. But but what is successful with her is that I took her to a park board meeting, and the park board commissioners said that we couldn't work towards reclaiming the name Badema Kaska because they couldn't say the word. They couldn't say the name. And my daughter asked me if she could talk to them. She wanted to talk to the class, she said. And so I took her to the front, and my daughter had them repeat the words after her. And she taught the parkboard, and she was 3. She taught the parkboard how to say "Bere makaska." And to me, that was success, watching my daughter do that. To me, success is when a colleague sends me a clip from the legislative hearings and somebody is going on about how the Minnesota Historical Society is hiring activists to tell revisionist history, and I get the support of the institution. To me, that's success. To me, success is all the hate mail that I receive on a regular basis from small-town settler descendants in Minnesota. I get a lot of that mail, and it's disturbing and it's hurtful. But I've learned to not take it personally and to realize that that means things are changing. The narrative is changing. We're stirring things up, and it's working. So for me, that's success. My failures, I think, really have to do with sometimes not taking care of my spiritual self enough, or not balancing that work, family, life sometimes, and the stress of working so much. I think that for me is a failure, but it's something that I'm working on and I have family support for, but I don't know. I think success and failure are odd things. They're very personal and they change on a day-to-day basis. And some days I think I'm a complete failure, and other times I think that things are going okay, but you just keep at it.
So a little story about my personal, for a personal failure that I thought was kind of the end of me and my reputation, was that it was easy to start the immersion school without a degree, without knowing the things I needed to know. We mobilized it. We had 15 kids in there. They were speaking Ojibwe. I was speaking Ojibwe. We had fluent speakers there. It seemed very great, and then I could not communicate the need for a toddler room or for a kindergarten room to the people that made decisions. And I kept thinking, why am I doing this? Why are we all doing this? Why are we just having a preschool? Why don't people care about the language? And I used to really take it personally on a huge level, that I didn't realize that there was a system that had to be worked, and that there were these policies were ingrained, and a lot of them are federal. And so I gotta say that I did, when I left there to pursue the fellowship, I did feel like it was a big failure on my part, and that it was, a disservice to my community when to get their hopes up about their children being able to speak Ojibwe, and to realize that I could not be an administrator, that I was a teacher, and that there was a whole political gauntlet that I had to know and move through in order to get those children to another grade. I decided that I needed to move forward with my education so that I could be that advocate and be the most professional and qualified person to do that job. So, I gotta say that when I changed my perspective about what my failure was, and that knowing that I'm gonna continue to do this work and it's gonna be successful, and I just have to make sure that I don't take systemic disparities and policies personally, and that I know that I'm doing the right thing by my community now. It's a process. It really is. So.
I don't know if I try not to look at things as successes or failures, more of an evolutionary thing. Or I'm just too bullheaded to accept anything as a failure. And so I call myself a professional student. I just had to redo things a lot. It was more relentless effort than book smarts. And that's what it takes, I would just think of our elders, our predecessors as, and the things they had to survive through, and then just think about it today, like, yeah, this is a cakewalk, we're not being marched anywhere with guns anymore. We're not being kidnapped as much, I suppose, anymore. There's still some institutional stuff that needs to be corrected. So that it puts a frame of reference on it. Are we where we need to be? No. We need more natives being gatekeepers. We need more gate beans. We need more folks within institutions that can recognize when some native folks don't need college educations to prosper in the system. Some do. But to know the difference, we need indigenous folks, not necessarily just native folks, but and I guess the monumental task is decolonizing this whole colonized system, if that's even possible, or just flat out start making our own and ignore that one, and it becomes some other system where money's not even included, in the whole grandiose scheme, green cities and beyond, But to get back to reality, at Standing Rock, we, like when Obama did that, the whole thing they were working on for a year, and they stopped the pipeline. A lot of people were convinced, even myself, but there were others that were smart enough to know, yeah, this is history repeating itself. They tell us one thing just to get the cameras off or the attention away from it, and then one popularity kind of fizzles out, then they get the nooses out or whatever. But with that, the folks that knew that, they were still picking out successes. Like, well, at least now we've trained, thousands of people on direct action. We've trained hundreds on folks on how to raise funds. We've educated folks on how to start resistances in their own areas. So planted lots of seeds. Even though we didn't stop this pipeline, we definitely hit them in the wallets. They missed deadlines, and that's the only way corporate folks listen, is if you hit them in their wallets. So it's, we came up with a little strategy out there, some of us. I don't know about everyone. I can only speak for about the 50 folks I was hanging out with. And the strategy is just repeatedly hit them in their wallets and their reputations. Try to make them look like Philip Morris, no company wants to be that. And it's just those little efforts, relentless, just, don't take it as failures. Think of them as small successes for a larger battle, or, hopefully the tide will turn someday. And if not, it took 500 years for them to break us down this far. I mean, we can't fix it overnight. It might take 500 years to get, normalize it. Who knows? I don't know. Maybe I'm an optimist, but yeah, just constant effort. Depression goes with it. Everyone, every day. It's never, not every day is a fun day where you get to talk to so many beautiful folks that agree with you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So we're gonna take audience questions after this, but I just kind of want to wrap up off of what you all said, because what you all said is really powerful. And when I think of like, I'm an organizer, I'm an activist, I'm part of a group called the Red Nation, and our fundamental challenge as activists is we see ourselves as two things. First, we're cheerleaders, right? We're all about Native liberation in all its manifestations, staying positive, waking up, and making sure you have a healthy lifestyle. And the second one is, how do we reproduce ourselves? And I was listening to you three to my immediate left, and all three of you are language teachers. And you've spent time working with youth, and in many ways you're reproducing that knowledge within Indigenous youth, and even Rory as well, working with Native youth. And one of the things that I think is really profound is that I didn't go into the university to become a scholar. I like went there to organize, but I ended up $100,000 in debt, and now I'm finishing up my PhD. But one of the things that I learned real quickly is that they can take away your land, they can take away your house, they can take away your water, but they can't take away your education. And that education isn't just a college degree, it's also the knowledge that everyone on this panel has access to, and they themselves reproduce in their own sort of ways. And it gets back to this sort of axiom that I like to say is that indigeneity is fundamentally a way of relating, not just relating amongst ourselves, but also relating to those that we see as different. And as Standing Rock proves, as Rory just brought up, we've taught thousands of people, right, not to be Lakota or not to be indigenous, but how to get down with us. And you can't take that experience away from them, no matter what you do. And so with that, I would like to open up questions to the audience. Oh yeah, give them a round. Bueller.
Thank you all so much for that. I'm kind of struck by something, and it kind of echoes a little bit of what Nick just ended with, how we do things in a certain way. So Kate, you work with your sister, you two are together, and last night, the More Than a Word documentary, it was made by two Dakota brothers from Standing Rock. So how do you see, I know community and family, and community is important, but that's really specific, right? Like these family relationships. And I'm just wondering how you see that as an important element, I guess, of something that needs to happen, something that should happen more of, sisters, brothers, people together, working together.
Well, I think for my sister and I, it's kind of unique because we're twins. We're Chekpas, as we say. And we've always grown up, we either fight or get along. It's always different every week. But we're both very skilled in different ways. She's educated as a lawyer and now works in philanthropy. And neither one of us graduated from high school, but we went on to be pretty successful. And we worked together. We went through school together and we supported each other. And I think that it's important to find allies, and it's important to find people that you can work with and that you can really highlight each other's strengths and be humble about your own weaknesses and hold each other up. And, with this community work, working in, for us as Dakota people, we're in such small numbers here in Minnesota because of our history. And so for our family, we work closely with our father as well. And so it's really a family, family effort in a lot of the work that we do. It can be really hard though sometimes when you're, creating a council and you have another family member on there and people say, well, you're not being objective or whatever have you. But I think it's more thinking about ourselves as through our skill sets and what we can all offer with one another and just supporting each other. Does that answer your question?
I think working with my partner, because it's not just a work thing that I'm doing, it's a life thing. And if all aspects of my life aren't a part of what I'm doing, either I'm a part of something that I don't really believe in, or I'm letting the wrong people lead me. So knowing that I got full backing at home, that we can support one another, I think that's very important, because who's gonna watch the kids when I go? I've been gone since Monday. I left Monday at noon to northern Wisconsin. The next day I was in the meetings all day. Then I raced down here to Minneapolis to catch a flight to Seattle, where I spent the last couple days. Then I flew back last night to come here for this meeting. If I did not have that type of support at home, I would not be able to accomplish what I'm trying to do. It'll definitely be difficult. Kids would have been hungry the past couple days with me gone. But I think it's very important because you need to have a counterpart, whether it's an objective counterpart, a female counterpart. You need that extra perspective because it's really nothing that anyone can do alone. Try to think of anybody that tried to do something alone. And it's very tough because I know what it was like to do it alone. And then through building relationships, when I go home, I got other crews that I go hang out with where I got other counterparts. So it's not just a singular person. So it's very important to build those relationships. And even though I'm still working on trust, I've only been, not quite a decade I've been good, but that's something I'm still working on.
I don't think it's really a question. Something I just want to say that my birthday today, I'm 78, no big deal anymore. But when I grew up going to the movies with, and all I knew about Native Americans was that they were always, cowboys were going to get them, or they were always chasing the stagecoach, or they were get a white woman and do something to her, and that's all I knew. I didn't know anything different than that. Well, probably the last couple of years here, where I started meeting people like you. So when I'm sitting here, you're talking about teaching your children, do something different. You're also teaching us.
I actually have a response. I think it's on Netflix, Real Engines. I think they mention the first movie, or I saw this in Native Cinema in the class, but the first motion picture I ever made was a Native ceremony, a dance. And the earlier pictures were of the actual plights of like real natives, but then kind of scripted. But then, yeah, when Hollywood got onto it and money got involved, it just, it tore it apart. It turned into that stereotype you grew up with. And that's why I work with youth to reclaim our identity in pop culture with reference to our history and whatnot. And it plays with the stereotypes, and sometimes maybe it crosses the line, I don't know. But the youth feel empowered to be Indian in the 21st century. Because I know when I was younger, I kind of, because it's a daily battle, it's a life thing. You have to deal with those stereotypes all the time. So kids, and myself included, when I was younger, I just didn't want to deal with it. I mean, I hate to say it, but I mean, when Sherman Alexie said, I don't think any real Indians ever gone through life without hating being Indian or wanting to deny being Indianers. I think that was one of the first quotes I heard from him and got me actually into his writings. But I totally related to that. And my whole thing for the rest of my life is how do we combat that? How can we turn that around so our daily struggle isn't so, well, I should rephrase that. How can our daily struggle be empowering, and pop culture and having fun with it is one way of doing it, along with language, of course. But yeah, so it's groups like this and gatekeepers, slowly changing that dialogue. And the next thing is that I think we talked about it last night, is the savior, you know, the Great White Hope, or what do you say, Kate Bean? Like, it's always like a white
savior conflict.
yeah, yeah, that's like the latest thing. It's like we can't save ourselves, we're helpless, you know. So that's anyway.
Yeah, I think what we were talking about is this, you know, we're seeing in our communities right now, particularly here in the Twin Cities, this usage of mediators. And we saw that with the Walker incident. Instead of our community members being spoken to directly and realizing that we're professionals and we can speak for ourselves and you can talk directly to us. We don't need mediators. We're educated, we're here, we're on the inside, we're on the outside. Talk to us. We don't need an in-between person. Facilitators can help with conversations. Mediators, we don't need them. We can talk for ourselves.
Indian wars, they were more than 150 years ago. What's the hate name?
You know, there's a narrative that's been going on here in Minnesota since our people were moved. That narrative is that that there was a war and there were winners and losers, and that the losers had to leave. We're changing that narrative. We're speaking about what actually happened to our families, how we were forced out, how we were executed, how we were forcibly removed and put into prison camps. And we're speaking for ourselves about that story. Some people aren't comfortable with that narrative changing. They like the feel-good story of, well, people got what they deserved and they were peacefully removed and it was for their own good. And that's not the way we view that history. We know through our oral history that that's not what happened to us. And so it's a disruption in this old, this sort of comfortable space that I think people in this area have been living in for a long time. It holds people accountable. It's not about making people feel bad. It's about making people understand that there was atrocities that were committed and that they have effects to this day, and that we have a right to speak about them and to tell our own stories.
I have a question that's related to the Walker and the scaffolding. So, I wasn't aware of the mediators, and were the mediators selected, who selected them, and were they from indigenous community, or?
No, there was one mediator that was used in that situation, and that's part of the problem is that a lot of us don't know. There wasn't a lot of transparency in what happened during that time. We're still, even last night, there was a few of us standing around talking about it, trying to sort out. That whole situation is still pretty close, and we're all still sort of wrapping our minds around what happened and how do we move forward.
Yeah, go ahead, let's keep going.
Yeah, so thanks for that question. We have some public art that will be happening. We have 2 Dakota artists and 1 non-Dakota artist that are working on public art right now that will acknowledge Dakota people and help share our history at B'nai Makaska, because we have a rich history there. But next month, I believe it's October 17th, there will be a hearing at Hennepin County. So the Hennepin County hearing will be taking on that next step for determining the name, and then it will be moved forward to the DNR. And so it went from the park board to Hennepin County, and we have a lot of commissioner support. But the commissioners still they answer to their constituents. If you can call your county commissioner and voice your support for the name reclamation, contact your county commissioner and come to the hearing and show support, that would be great.
I'll start with that one, and actually Taylor's probably the best one to ask that, so I'll kind of envision what she would say. But it's really like the Native American Community Development Institute hosts a bunch of community meetings and invites other nonprofits or Native orgs to attend. We also have the Metropolitan Urban Indian Directors. I believe there's about 16 directors on that board. And it's these weekly meetings that are open to the public where we basically mediate events and organize and keep folks informed. And with the efforts of Taylor and Jen and Cole and Robert and myself, being able to be a hub for community folks to come to in case they missed a meeting, and organizing meetings and holding spaces for others. We raised like $30,000 inside of a month with our community last fall for Standing Rock. I think that's why we rallied so many folks together so quickly for the scaffold, because we had these folks already in place and ready to go. And I get and that core group kind of spreads out through the Moccasin Telegram, kind of like the old school Facebook of just, folks just talking about it, and that spreads like wildfire through the community. And it's just maintaining that trust in our mission statement, I guess, our personal statements and what we do, and wearing multiple hats, like how you say, she has to wear her historical society hat and then her personal activist hat and her, her mother hat and all these different hats. It's being able to navigate all those without burning any bridges is tough sometimes, but it's that relentless weekly activities with folks and staying in tune with each other and supporting each other, when we hear of what's going on.
I think supporting each other is key, and also not speaking for each other, because we have such a diverse group of Native people in the Twin Cities. You shouldn't ask an Ojibwe person about the history of Dakota people or how Dakota people feel about something. I see Taylor nodding her head, and I always appreciate that she forwards people to me. And so it's that support. And, in this community, we see a lot of that support, but we also sometimes see the flip side of that. And our community is just as bad as other communities in not supporting some of our key leaders and people, and seeing that happen is really, really dangerous to our families and to our community. And so it's really important to be supportive of our Native community here and of our leaders, and to really understand that every conversation, every situation is very dynamic and complex, and to speak to people directly and to be compassionate. We just need more compassion. We need to be nicer to one another. I'm not entirely sure. I think that there are still conversations happening on ways to move forward. But that's something some of us at a reception last night were talking about, what is, how do we move forward on that? There are different groups that are sort of amongst themselves talking, but there hasn't yet been any sort of widespread outreach to the Dakota community specifically. There was a lot of what we call in-reach, where you answer to whoever the loudest voice is that comes to you, but there was not proper outreach to communities, which include exiled Dakota community members outside of the state of Minnesota. And so right now, there's just needs to be more conversations had, more people need to be listened to, and I would hope that the next step would be supporting not just one, but multiple Dakota artists. Since this is Dakota land, there should be a lot of opportunity for that.
Take like a couple more questions.
Maybe one more question?
One more question?
Yeah.
Make it a good one.
Pressure's on.
No pressure.
Smart people. Either that or we'll make Taylor give a short speech for all the references.
Do it. Do it. Look at her blush. Let's see her blush. Come on.
Maybe we can just do closing statements from each of you. I'd like to hear what, briefly, what you imagine a decolonized future to be, the work that you do. And yeah, elevator speech, so.
You push the button.
So we'll go, we'll start from that.
Start reverse.
Yeah, start with the artist.
Oh man, this is my ultimate goal. Is my favorite quote is from Trudell. Everyone comes from an indigenous background. It's just how long it's been since that culture's been colonized. When I say it might be a little tougher to decolonize yourself, the further away you are from that, and that's why I think a lot of folks attract to indigenous cultures to find, because it's inherently in folks, is just finding out what that is and getting that relationship back, and it's misinterpreted. But I think welcoming folks to join in on indigenous, and there's going to be a lot of mistakes, a lot of misappropriation, a lot of fumbles, but within those is a lot of little gems for folks to grow. And I think in the end, for me, if we could decolonize these systems and change policy to where we're in the sustainable cities and renewable energies, and everyone has a garden and chicken coops and all sorts of fair barter trade systems set up where we're not so dependent on cash, that would be my perfect utopia, I guess, of decolonized life.
One of the statements I made in regards to Anishinaabe natural resources is when I started thinking about how our current system in Ojibwe country would look like had the treaties been upheld. The oppression would have been at the minimal. We were allowed to go on and live life like how we wanted to, like they say that we were able to. I think about what would that look like. That's going to take more research on my part, because in Mille Lacs we're on the outskirts of Ojibwe country, and I think that our people there only held on to what was important. So they held on to the language that was important. They held on to some of the ceremonies, namings, offerings. That was important. And then I wonder what was let go. What part of natural life was said, you know what, we can't take that with us anymore. And that saddens me. But when I think of a decolonized, I think it goes along with being able to walk in both a traditional world and a contemporary world, and as it is today, because we have to. Ojibwe people and lots of indigenous people adapted to their environment. So if we take in the things that are now in our environment and adapt to it as an Anishinaabe or Dakota, Lakota person would, or even a Navajo person would, how would that look like? I think it's gonna take a lot of talking and visiting with my people where I'm from. Other people go talk about what would it look like where they're from. I heard this phrase recently is that, every Ojibwe person alive has an Ojibwe story to tell, whether if they're lived on the reservation or born and lived detached from any traditional lifestyle to where they can't relate. It's still an Ojibwe story, and it's an indigenous story. But somewhere in there, somewhere in your minds and spirits, there's a indigenous history that's kind of wrapped up, whether you fell away from it or not, and it's the Anishinaabe spirit that is going to call out for you and try to lead you back to what makes you feel good and what makes you feel important. So that's what I view a decolonized world would look like.
Okay, quickly. A decolonized situation. My ideal situation is that we have, right now we're pulling our children through many systems, education systems, Head Start, federal, BIE schools. The college system is all American concepts and through English language, and any other languages or cultures are elective. It's not, the education system as it stands makes more Americans. It doesn't make thriving Indigenous people who are excited and proud, excited for themselves or proud to be who they are. And so I imagine decolonization to me looks like educational sovereignty via the language and traditional practices that are taking care of the individual, the children, the community, mind, body, spirit, and giving the children the ultimate worldview, or the lens that was meant for them to see the world and interact with the world, and to nurture themselves and to nurture their own children. And so that's what I view as decolonization.
I actually hate the word decolonized. I think that I work for a colonial institution, and that colonial institution will never be anything other than a colonial institution. That's what it is. That's what it was founded on. It was founded by one of the people that exterminated my people from the state. But what can we do about it? I guess that's would be considered decolonizing in a sense. But the way I think about it is I don't know how to be any other way than Dakota. I know how to be myself. And I think that we need to get to a point where we learn as much as we can from these institutions. We work with these institutions. We partner with these institutions. We don't advise them, but we work with them and be a part of the process and become the decision makers. And then we create from the ground up on our own. And we really express our sovereignty that way.
Say one thing. Okay, just to wrap this up. I think each one of the panelists brings up a really good point in the sense that I believe, and maybe you may not agree with me, but I believe that Indigenous peoples and communities, from what I've heard so far, know 100%, and I have 100% faith in them, what they want and what they need. I don't think we're lacking vision. On the other hand, I will say, from what I'm hearing, is that settler colonialism and racism, yes, they do control us as Indigenous peoples, but those systems are not individual choices or behaviors on behalf of non-Native folks, but in fact they're structures. And we can't choose to disengage from them because we have to confront them at all turns, but settler society can choose to disengage us, and they selectively engage us. But I will say this, that racism was not meant to control Native people. It was meant to control white people. So when we think about sort of these larger questions about what a possible future could look like, I would like to offer that as something to think about as you all go about your lives and listen to the amazing panelists that are coming up next. So thank you.
Yeah. All right, if everyone would take their seats. My name is Kevin Gover. I'm the director of the National Museum of the American Indian. We want to thank the University of Minnesota American Studies Department and American Indian Studies Department for hosting us this afternoon, and thank especially Brenda Child for organizing and arranging for these terrific speakers. As I said, my name's Kevin Gover. I'm a citizen of the Pawnee Nation of Oklahoma. I've had the good fortune to be the director of the museum for the past 10 years. This subject of activism is one that, of course, should interest us all, and certainly as observers and reporters of contemporary Native American culture, the museum would be remiss
not to see and share what we see about activism in Indian country at this time. There's never been a time when Indian country was not active and activist. It seems to be gaining some more visibility right now. We puzzle a bit about why that is because the issues really haven't changed very much. I was always, as I was watching the issue at Standing Rock develop, I kept asking myself, why this one? Why is it that this one caught fire? Because these insults to Native American lands, waters, and environment are an ongoing thing. There's really never a time, never a year, never a moment when Indian natural resources are not being negatively affected in some way by private concerns and government action. So, and that puzzle remains with me because I'm not sure why that did, but I'm glad that it did. You'll see our museum, as a few years ago, we decided to do a symposium about the issue of mascots. We are fortunately located in the home of racist mascot imagery, Washington, D.C., and our symposium got a lot of attention. I was just speaking with Amanda Blackhorse, who was one of the young people who challenged the Washington football team's trademark, and with some considerable success. And what we talked about was the fact that it is now on the record at both the board that issues these trademarks and in courts of law that that particular trademark is racist and disparaging of Native Americans. The Supreme Court did not say it was not racist. It said, yes, a mark can be racist and people still have the right to use it. So the ground has shifted, and now we say, we never said you didn't have the right to use it. We've always said you shouldn't use it. And that's the ground where we stand today and where we'll continue to stand. So we're very fortunate to have two terrific artists with us to close out our program this afternoon, Louise Erdrich and Edgar Heap of Birds. I'm sure that both of them are known to you. Since we're at a university, though, I thought it worthwhile to rattle off some of their academic credentials. Let's see. For Edgar, he got his Bachelor of Fine Arts at Kansas University, his MFA at Temple's Tyler School of Art. He has received an honorary degree. He has taught at Yale, the Rhode Island School of Design, and at the University of Oklahoma. Louise Erdrich received her bachelor's from Dartmouth in English and a master's from Johns Hopkins. She also received an honorary Doctor of Letters from Dartmouth, and apropos of the moment was offered an honorary degree from the University of North Dakota, but declined because of their racist mascot at the time. So we're going to have a slightly different format. Edgar's going to talk at us for a few minutes, after which he and Louise will take the stage, and Louise will conduct something of an interview to tease out some more of what we've just seen. So with that, please welcome Edgar Heap of Birds.
Thanks for the welcome. Great to be here with everybody. And can I have the lights down, please? I always begin with acknowledgments and where I am, on this earth. Certainly, I want to acknowledge first the waters. We're by this river and all the lakes and the renewable source, the renewing source that we all hold very dear. The waters. Then also, I want to acknowledge the sky above us that keeps us here, protected on this earth, and we call it Wukgim in Cheyenne language. And then I also want to acknowledge the animals that are here to guide us. We all need that guidance. We need to follow and listen to those animals. They tell you what you need to know. Also, I want to acknowledge the earth, the stone, and particularly for me, coming here to your country, the pipestone that you give us, to make all our prayers all over this whole continent. It comes from here, so this is the place that all the prayers are helped. And as a leader of the Elk Warrior Society, Cheyenne, Southern Cheyenne, that's how I'll be speaking today. And I'll be talking to you about the activist issues, but from a perspective of where I come from, my projects I've done, and the history I want to relay to you. The first image here is the family. My grandfather on the far left, a little boy with a headdress on. That's Guy, Heap of Birds here. So in terms of activism, can the lights go down any lower? Is that possible? I'm not even going to do the video, but I don't know if you help with the lights. But certainly, activism is about protection, is about helping your people, your communities, and so on. So we have to know what we're protecting to have the activist issues go forward and challenge. So the family is what I'm talking about right here. His father is Black Wolf, Heap of Birds in the center with a pipe. He was a leader of the Elk Warrior Society also. And Black Wolf's father was Moyuhanhaskus, and that's many magpie birds together, our chief Heap of Birds, who was a POW at Fort Marion and did not return to the reservation. And of course, in America, in our lives, we have this legacy. This is what we have for Native people. And it's actually a print, too, that's at the Boakley Gallery right now here in town. But certainly, we have to live with this legacy of all the racism and the mascots, which were mentioned earlier. But living people is what we want to be thinking about. At the bottom is living people. You can remember them. So the magpie birds is what I was looking at in terms of imagery, and the real name for Heap of Birds was many magpies and the blackbirds. But it's unnatural to have this moniker. With activism and any kind of protest or action, it's one thing that I always talk about as a insistence. So it's not about being asked or encouraged or to whine around about it. You got to insist on it. You have to insist and position yourself to be in it. And so here I am with my pipe bag, the prayer pipe at Fort Marion, and I'm going to pray for all those warriors that were imprisoned there and the families and those that didn't return home, the ones that are buried there. But I sort of made the fort shut down and made the fire inside of the fort. And maybe no one ever did that before. Someone needed to make that prayer. And so we did that, and there's a couple of nervous guards on either side of me there. So what's he going to do next? And of course, Fort Marion, a real key element in our lives, the POW experience and the capture, the hostage taking that occurred. And for me, to bring it to kind of full circle, I go to Guantanamo. And so there you have no charges, you have no courts, you have no peer review, you have no kind of rights, Fort Marion. And you were just held hostage until they complied back on the reservation for the 3 forts they built around us, Fort Reno, Cantonment, and Fort Supply to resupply Custer at the Washita Massacre. So here we are at Guantanamo today, right now, same kind of affair going on. And they also named, as you know, bin Laden Apache name. So he was given an Apache name as they hunted him, and they hunted both of these men, of course, bin Laden and Geronimo. So we were still targets. We are still targets today, even given all the military equipment, the Tomahawk rocket and the Apache helicopter and so on. And this is a lithograph print I did, a monoprint, and we have some of those here to show you too in the gallery. A really exciting project in terms of activism going on in Los Angeles is at LAX Art. And this is a wonderful gallery space, artist-run space, kind of the old school space where artists just take over and do their thing. And this is all Farsi. So this is the U.S. Constitution written on the building in Farsi. So they're examining these ideas as to whether the Constitution is for everybody. It could be in Spanish, could be in Farsi, could be in Cheyenne, could be in Dakota. It is still functioning at that level of the language. And they even painted the inside of the gallery in the same text. And so it was called Reconstitution from an earlier activist show in New York that I was part of with group material, Constitution. This is called Reconstitution. And I spoke there at the gathering with the young artists in Los Angeles a few months ago. And that's my series, about the genocide and democracy behind me. And probably one of the most important elements of protest or activism is to certainly comment on America's failure. We were talking about failure earlier. Well, there's been big American failure. We can point that out very quickly. But we did this in New York City, and it was 1 year after 9/11. And so artists were asked to comment on 9/11, and even it was surprising how many artists were activist artists, radical artists, but they took a very kind of patriotic tone about the loss of lives at 9/11. And of course, for most of our nations, that's just a tiny little drop in the bucket for loss of your community at 9/11. So my project was called Cause and Effect, and I made it out of American flags, cause and effect. And of course, the brutality, the bullying, the universal military patrolling this globe with the empire behind it, threatening everybody, cruise missiles dropping on people, drones dropping bombs tonight somewhere in Afghanistan. All that happening, that's going to cause an effect. You know, it's not going to get away with that. And so that bombing, those jets going into the towers was part of that. And when I was, shopping at 7-Eleven, they were selling little American flag stickers everywhere that next week or two. So they were making money on the patriotism. You could buy little stickers. So I bought the stickers and made a piece, Cause and Effect, and showed it in New York City. And another issue, certainly with mascots, I did a big project in Australia. I'll show you a little bit of that later, and work with Aboriginal artists. So I take it internationally, these activist tendencies. But of course, we toured the show to Cleveland, Ohio, and I had a special piece I made for the baseball team. And here's their image. And as I say that, they got hurt feelings about it. They didn't like that. And I say they said I was infringing on their copyright. Which is pretty amazing. And so they censored it, but then we took it to the newspaper. They sent a reporter to my studio in Oklahoma within like 8 hours. A stringer came to my studio in Oklahoma, took a picture of me and the mascot imagery, got in the newspaper the next day, the Plain Dealer. And then within about 2 weeks, the museum said, "Can you please make our billboard for us, please? Can you please make that?" And then by that time, we had money donated from anonymous donors. We made 3 instead of 1. So the public supported the message and gave funding to make this grimacing face. I work with students a lot. I'm a professor, but I do a lot of visiting with programs around the world. And I'm very happy to work with these students here at the University of Utah. And of course, the sign pieces I've been making here about the lakes being renamed and the native hosts, Dakota people, and the card we have passed around, the billboard at Buckley Gallery. All these come from the series called Native Hosts. This particular one is similar, where Salt Lake City is reversed. So I always try to turn around the province or state so they can actually look at their past differently. If you could pick up Minnesota and spin it, they might see something better than the way they see it now. And in talking to the students, Ute came up, of course, and it was pretty amazing. Of course, they all told me Ute doesn't mean anything. It's Nuchi. So Utah doesn't mean anything. University of Utah doesn't mean anything. So we corrected it and put the Nuchi in. So we always go back to the original text. And these are students at the Native American Center in Salt Lake City. I mentioned the project in Australia. It's called 16 Songs. And I've worked there many times, traveled throughout the whole nation. I've been hosted on the reservation, Muntajulu, at Uluru, but they call it in English Ayers Rock. Really a spiritual place in the center of the continent. And I offered 16 words to the artists there. Green for awareness resistance. Sky, earth offering patience. And the show toured all over America for 4 years. So I think this was in Colorado Springs. It went to the University of Colorado. Green, strength, trees, strength, sing new growth, and solstice for everyone, dance water. So those 16 phrases were what I gave to the artists, and they came out of our Earth Renewal Ceremony, the Cheyenne Nation. And I just finished another 4 years of the ceremony and went to Australia. And so there I offered it to artists And then I asked them to join me in an exhibition about renewal. And they were all very receptive. They were urban Aboriginal artists in Sydney, Australia, and also in Adelaide in South Australia. So I lived there. Also, my family came to live there as well. So I think it's very important, certainly, to mentor younger artists and other communities of artists, and to share these ideas of protest and activism, and maybe to incite something. I have to admit that. I have to incite something along the way as well. So Gordon Hookey is in the center with the red shirt, really great artist, painter. And here's his painting called New Growth. And that's a painting he did when the Sydney fires were happening. There were fires in Sydney, Australia, around 1996, I believe. And so these fires were coming in from the forests. Here's the city of Sydney, the Opera House, Centrepoint Tower, the Harbour Bridge. And so that was happening, and there was a lot of people worrying about the outcome of the fires and should the forest be where it is. Of course, the city grew too close to the forest. That's the problem. It wasn't the forest problem at all. But the issue that Gordon brought up was wonderful, and he said, new growth is, as they say, we should have the black fellows light more fires and burn this place down and renew all of Sydney, burn Sydney down, and then we'll have real renewal, So a pretty aggressive point of view, and so I supported that, and we showed that work all over America, but it came from Sydney, Australia. I also collaborated with another very important artist, a very, very strong stature, Fiona Foley, and we had a show where Captain Cook landed. So Circular Quay, center of Sydney, Australia. We were at the Museum of Contemporary Art right there, and very posh, upscale, huge sky rises, and somewhat urbanized, certainly. But here are the language pieces that we put together ourselves. The piece is called Learn a War Cry, and her work is on the left side, and my work is on the right, Cheyenne on the right, Eora on the left. And so the text reads in Eora, this is talking to Captain Cook and the Brits. Milk, honey, oh, you hurt me, set on fire, itchy, a war cry, blood, brave, black. And on my side of the text, this is the text from Cheyenne. Brits, ships, steal, hurt, learn, share, commonwealth. And of course, the issue of commonwealth was always pretty funny to me, or strange how they would enslave everybody and call it a commonwealth. So this is the main door of the museum. It slides open automatically, and you walk into these words at the Circular Quay. And certainly community was discussed today, and we're at the center of it, where I am, just very happily coming to some benefit dance, Gary Community Hall. My mother lives 2 blocks away. And I've been mentored by 4 major priests, Paul Hart, Peak Hart, Roy Dean Bullcoming, Vernon Bullcoming, and Jasper Wache. So those are my instructors. Each one helped me for 4 years apiece. So we've gone 16 years together. On my right there is Roy Dean. We enjoy dancing, just a social dance together. We've been through a lot, but and we have other ceremonial leaders with us. But this is a happy day, like some graduation or something maybe, and it's happening every week. And so we do the activism, the protest to protect this community. Out of that community, I wanted to talk about Patricia Mousetrail Russell, really an amazing artist, also a priestess in the same ceremony. If you're a woman, she can take you through, and she knows a whole lot. And she makes these cradle boards, so she's probably one of the best artists with beads on earth. And she makes these wonderful, they call it pashist. And here's the piece, a little close up. And with her work, she tells a very good story that was passed down from the relatives, the elders, that came from the flag here, from the Black Kettle Massacre of Custer in western Oklahoma, and they gave Black Kettle the flag to raise to show that he was a peaceful village, peaceful chief, and they still massacred the tribe. So Mouse Trail Russell said, the great-great-grandma said, that flag's yours now because your grandpa respected it. You do whatever you want with it. So she put it on her cradle board here. So they own the flag now. They do whatever they want with it. At the same time, the space shuttle was going into space. There's the space shuttle. And that's the one that exploded in air. And so she makes the mixed beads, the chaos of what happened with that spacecraft. So in a sense, she intervened. She has activism in her beadwork. You know, she's taken a diversion from traditional pashist beading and given you another outlook, which I think is just wonderful. And that's my son's cradle board. And then we go to a project I had with the National Museum of American Indian, who invited me here. We heard from the director a few minutes ago. And so they were very supportive in my effort to address the deaths, the memorial for the Sioux warriors and 3 children that had died in Buffalo Bill's Wild West shows in Europe. And so I was there with my family in Venice. And so this is a grave marker for the wolf, and he is there buried below. Here are the warriors and children that came to the Venice Biennale area to do their Wild West show with Buffalo Bill. They came out of Wounded Knee. They were survivors, and they escaped America's tragedy to go to Europe, but then they found more tragedy because Cody didn't take care of them, and there were over 20 that died, 3 girls that died as well. They came to Verona, which is near Venice, and that is where I visited as well. And later we would take the exhibit to Verona as well. I did artwork at the airport. This is about a 30-foot banner we had at the customs checkpoint. When you came into Marco Polo International Airport, you were greeted by my message about the warriors that died in Italy. And they died in Italy, in Russia, I'm saying Moscow, Barcelona, London, Paris, all over Europe. They're buried all over Europe. So I researched the death sites and the burial sites. So I listed all the Nastona is daughter in Cheyenne, and then Numsham is grandfather. So we looked at all the men as grandfathers, and then the daughters that had died. So those are all their names there. And Rementare is to lament or remember. So we spoke in Italian with the Dakota names, Cheyenne words, and English. So I made a series of panels that were memorials to each person that had tragically died in the Wild West shows. And I made some that were smaller, shorter, for the 3 children. And when I put them up on the colonnade, a little girl came and played with them. It was very eerie. That she liked seeing those little signs. And it was another kid like her age that died, and they came to interact with those signs. We also made some comments as though the warriors were talking back to the Italians and to the British and to the Americans. Of course, the first use of ghetto came in Venice, and it was a place where they actually built cannon. It's a place where they had a foundry, and they built cannon. And so in Italian, that the ghetto refers to like a cannon-making place. But they were very racist there, the Venetians. And so they imprisoned all the Jews in this old foundry that was shut down and put a lock on it, and they made them wear a yellow marker. So I made this a yellow border and put it up. And in a sense, it was a precursor or the same era of our reservations to capture us. And certainly the activism must go forward, which was mentioned earlier today, to the youth. And so you must be able to transmit these actions and history. So my son, Wookgim, named after the blue sky, he's there in Venice with me, and we did a project in London a couple years ago, and so I saw him yesterday. So we're still close, and he's working with me off and on, but he knows the history very closely. I also created, the National Museum of American Indian supported my efforts to go forward and really had an amazing few days. And we hired a glass blowing studio in Murano, which is an island right next to Venice. And it was the most wonderful experience I've had as an artist, is to work with these brilliant maestros that can make this glass, these big vases, 1 foot tall, and they speak to the glass, They whisper to the glass, and then it does what they ask. This is brilliant. And so they taught me how to blow the glass along together, Simone, Sindisi Studio. And so here are the vases with the bodies of the warriors floating around the outside. And it's almost like it's an activist stance in glass, in that we're showing the 16 bodies that are floating by on this wonderful kind of form. And the Smithsonian has I gave them one of these vases, so you might go check on it and see if it's there. No, I'm just kidding. This is Oatmogi, and so as was written in the paper today, there's a nice article in the paper today, but in the Star Tribune. But I really feel strongly that we have to come forward when we travel and move to other nations' territory in terms of tribal nations, to acknowledge them and to honor them. If you're given a voice. And so I'm in Atlanta. I've been invited to Atlanta before, to the Atlanta College of Art. And of course, I was really excited to find the pyramids in Georgia. And I talked to my curator about the pyramids, and that was the legacy I wanted to connect with for my own research and my own well-being. I asked for the pyramids of Georgia, and she said, "Are there pyramids in Georgia?" And they didn't know where they were. And they're huge things in Macon, Georgia, as tall as Banks, and then north that's Oatmogi, and then Etowah is north of Atlanta by the mountains. So that's the name of the project. So I had students we built the pyramids. No one knew where they were, no one knew what they were. And so we had to build them for them to see them. So I built the Oatmogi pyramids, replicas. There are 2 sizes. There's a large pyramid and a small one. That's the large one, that's the small one. Students are helping me with the drawing on the outside. These are actually ceramic designs here on the outside that we researched from images from their pottery, So that was very important, and to have the activism take part with the students, have them make the work, was really wonderful. And I made 4 sign panels, which are in the gallery. We're having a reception gallery talk at 7 o'clock today at Bulkley Gallery. And these are in the show. And I always talk about my favorite sculpture for this was the Rodin. He's a tired walker. He's all tired, slumped over there. So do you choose to walk? Were you forced to walk? Trail of Tears, 1836, walk to Oklahoma. And so the Trail of Tears, leaving those pyramids and that way of life, the plants, the animals, and coming to this place called Indian Territory, the Chickasaw, the Yuchi, the Creek, even the Seminoles coming from further southeast there. All that disruption and tragedy, so walking was a penalty. That was a big penalty. It's not a good way to lose weight or whatever, like to have a power walking days. It's like, if you want to do that, walk to Oklahoma. You'll be really skinny when you get there, I promise you. I also take the protest and activism to the doorstep of Europe, because I think often we really look at America so harshly, but as the beginning. But the British Crown and the Russian government in Alaska and the Northwest Coast, the Spaniards in the South, the French, they were really, the villains in the colonial life. So I took this banner to London as part of an ecological show called Wanu's Territories. And we put this 30-foot banner up on a wall. And the wall is very near St. Pancras Station, King's Cross. And we did that because that is the Eurostar train. The Eurostar goes to the European capital, to Brussels. It starts here at St. Pancras Station. So all the money, all the wealth, all the development it was robbed from the so-called the New World. I mean, all that happened and was taken to Europe, and they're still having parties with that money, the gold, all the resources. So we take that mission back to the Crown, and I had an anthropologist hired to research the loss of life, and it went between 25 million to 100 million spirits lost in this hemisphere from so-called contact. And so the contact could have been a disease. So we have the biohazard here, biohazard, and that the sword is actually a British church form. It's real. So the dagger of Christianity that kills you very well too. And then we had that be the border of the banner, and I brought that into London Heathrow. And then the show toured. It went into Berlin, and then later it went to Vancouver. There's actually a book about that called Wanu Territories. So going back to Europe is very important as well. And I work a lot. I just got back from Singapore and also Sumatra. I had a residency in Sumatra and Singapore, and I was working with tribal elders and weavers in Indonesia and northern Sumatra on this volcanic lake called Lake Toba. But this is in Bali, and Bali, the volcano of Bali. Looking back, and you can kind of go toward, I like to go toward Lombok, another island east of Bali, and there's a wonderful reef there. So the spirits I acknowledged in the beginning of my talk today, they're certainly present there, and the reefs are the most amazing wilderness I've ever known. So that's the volcano of Bali. My project in Indonesia, this was back in 2005, was called Thursdays. And so I can take, I guess, a protest or activism in a certain direction, but I'm also very much involved with my just own personal vision, sensuality, life, family, partner. And so that was Thursdays. And so at my university job I had in 2005, I taught Mondays and Wednesdays. So on Thursday, I got to do whatever I want to do. I'm gone on Thursday. You don't find me at University of Oklahoma on Thursday. Now I have a better job. I actually teach 1 day a week. But before, I had 2 days a week. So Thursdays was my premise. And so I made all these words about what I do on Thursday. And I took them to students at the Bandung Institute of Technology outside of Jakarta on top of the mountains. And here are the students and my wife, Shanna Ketchum-Heapleberts, who's a professor at OU and also an art critic, a PhD candidate at Middlesex University in London. We went there together, did workshops with students in Bandung. And Bandung, you might look it up in terms of activism. It was the hosting site in 1955 of the World Summit of Africa and Asia. And Nehru was there, Ho Chi Minh was there, Robert Wright was there. It's an amazing thing. You should check it out. It's like, I wish we'd have that again. And all these leaders from, all these brown people from Asia and Africa got together and discussed issues. So, and they have a replica of the meeting in a hall in Bandung. I went and saw these people sitting there. It's just incredible. So the students took my words. I gave them a set. They picked their set they wanted, and then they made their own words in the Indonesian language, Javanese language. Here's a student with a sign, runs like honey. So again, it wasn't just, protest things. It was more, I guess, sensual things, I guess you could say too. And there's the installation on the wall. So the top row is my text. Then the next row is Javanese. The next row would be my text here. And then we switch off. So the first thing about it, of course, that we have equal billing. The students and me take up the same space, in a sense. We don't have more than they do. And then they were able to just take a text and then just translate it, but in their own way of thinking. And that's the freedom I enjoy learning from them in that way. A female student picked these sets of words, and it was very interesting to see how she took it, hold a curve, and she told me this was that men touch her too much. She don't like being looked at like a curving object, and so she took it in a very interesting way, like a very kind of aggressive. She didn't like the aggression of males to her. And I've also worked extensively in Africa, and so helping artists in Africa was very important to me, and learning from artists and communities. But of course, going into the bush is where I always go, like Uluru or to that reef in Bali, or to go to Matapo's Hills near a town called Bulawayo. And these are ancient caves on top of a big mountain. You hike up this big mountain, there's eagles flying, there's a thatched roof village below you. And this is my colleague Philip. And so he's showing me the drawings. It's an amazing drawings, maybe 2,000 years old, of the antelope, the zebra, the giraffe. And it could be thousands of years of drawings one on top of another. And of course we have those here in America, but to see them in Africa was very important in my African projects that I was involved with at the time at a studio in Cape Town, and also I was in Zimbabwe a lot. So this is Matapo's Hills in Bulawayo. I also spoke with students at the Delta Gallery and the Museum of Harare, Zimbabwean Museum of Harare. And here they are together. I'm sitting in the middle. So I gave them some posters and showed them some of my work, some political art, some of the protest, activist art. And it had become, of course, Zimbabwe came from Rhodesia. And it was a military war against the colonizing people. And so it was a very bloody and very aggressive war to make this place called Zimbabwe. And the students asked me, they raised their hand and asked me from the back of the room, are you ever afraid you're going to get killed doing this art? And to them, that's how it was. It was a life-risking effort to be an activist, because there you came out of the roads, you came out of Rhodesia, the death squads, and so they were really struggling with how do they make a rebuttal. And so I think I helped with that a bit. My favorite piece I encountered in Africa was a guerrilla action, and so that's another point I think we need to think about is how do we be activists, but not always be accountable, not always be present to discuss it. It's sort of a slash and burn activism, I guess, in a sense. But they have a thing called Traditional Day, and it comes out of almost like Thanksgiving Day, where you honor all of your founding fathers, but it's for Afrikaans in South Africa, and Cape Town, Johannesburg. And so they have this day about Traditional Day, but it doesn't honor the indigenous people. It honors like George Washington, Thomas Jefferson. So here at the bottom is the inscription, Louis Botha, farmer, warrior, statesman. So here's like George Washington on his horse. But this group I got to know called Public Eye rushed in on the eve of Traditional Day and dressed him up as an Afro warrior going out on a vision quest. So they took Botha, gave him this incredibly cool broad nose. There he is. That's amazing. Big lips, This is like, taking Trump and painting him up like somebody else, right? And then they gave him a headdress and a cloak to go out. And before they could wash it off, they took a JPEG and sent it to me, So now there it is, So it's not like anyone had to go get in jail or whatever, get shot doing this. They did it in the night, right in front of the capital of the nation, and then took a picture of it and ran off, right? But the brilliant part of it also is that it was when it was a younger nation, South Africa, after apartheid. And so the discourse was certainly that Africa is a young adolescent, South Africa is. And it's got to learn how to walk and run. And they maybe need to take a vision quest and go find out who they are. I work a lot in Canada also. This is Toronto, talking about the pedophilia across that nation, terrible, and ours as well. I also worked in Vancouver, and I had a rebuttal to the Olympics, the Winter Games, and I was really appalled by them using Northwest Coast imagery to give medals, gold medals, after all they did to the tribes, and they take the imagery, put it on the medal. And so I had the killer whale from their medal eat the skier. So here's a downhill racer. He's going to go down. But I had to alter the ring so everyone gets sued. I I messed up the rings. I also worked in Northern Ireland, in Derry, and here's some graffiti, IRA graffiti, and sort of activism, certainly very profound in Derry. SAS is their secret air service, so it's like the CIA assassin squad, the Brits, and they come, they killed IRA members in Gibraltar. I don't know if you remember that. They killed them on the street. So here are just some graffiti when I'm walking down the street in Derry. I had a residency there, I had a show there with Declan McConigal, a really great curator. And my billboard, right where the Bloody Sunday Massacre, this is the billboard I made. Peace, unite, respect, Irish homelands. No more kingdoms, no more king. So Prince Charles, we saw him coming to be the king. And there was so much bad monarchy, so I was just thinking about, don't make another king. I also work in China. I've been in Beijing and Shanghai. And there, I wanted to also address their myth of democracy. During Tiananmen Square, they brought out the Statue of Liberty. And as many of you know, Native activists here today, it's very important to remark that the Statue of Liberty has its back to all the Indians. It offers everyone else to come to the nation, but not the Indians. The Indians has a back toward us. And so I made this message years before, don't believe Miss Liberty. And I showed it in Beijing, and then they made me a wonderful poster, really wonderful, a young student in Beijing University, with my sculpture from Denver, the wheel. And wheel, it's become a site for somewhat ceremony, remembrance from Sand Creek at the Denver Art Museum. And it's 50 foot across, 10 standing fork trees, like ceremonial trees in a sense. And of course, there's the markings of how it deals with the universe, Regal, Sirius, all these different star patterns. So it's actually very much the medicine wheel in Wyoming, the bighorn wheel, and it's very much the astronomy or science of the tribe. And then here is kind of an interesting diagram. So you have the bighorn wheel, and these spokes are very important to the astronomy. And of course now, as I was mentioning, my instructors in this lodge, but the rafters are the spokes. And this contemporary, they're all over the west, east face of Rocky Mountains, all the way into Canada from Oklahoma in solstice time. So my sculpture in Denver deals with these forks, and the red, and there's what holds up the universe. It's like my effort to help with the forks. And here's an image of me standing in the center in Denver. And it's an autobiographical story from prehistory kind of into Anasazi to reservation life. It's very complex. You can look it up on the internet, I guess, and there's some films about it as well. Leonard Peltier's numbers on there from Leavenworth and AIM movement, all these things. But what I'm really proud of is that I left the roof off. So in terms of activism, one of the things you might consider is the incompleteness of it. Like you don't have to finish it all off. So I left the top off, and this was in 2005. And I thought, well, what I want to say about that is what Native people do finishes the roof. They complete it for me. So I just put up the forks to support it. And so now it's a site where they have the run across the lands of Colorado for the Sand Creek Memorial. They come and have a vigil, candlelight vigil at Wheel, So there's many memorials and remembrances at the sculpture. It has become a destination, and I'm not there. I don't sponsor it or anything. I just really happy that they finish it. They finish the top for me. My daughter, Desba, Lightning Woman, named after my father's mother, she's there just last year, and we're talking about the sculpture. And so, again, going forward to share that. And the wheel itself, very important to have this remark about the extremes of the sun, the winter solstice, the short day, the long day, the medicine wheel. I did a workshop with 250 elders on my tribe, and they got me a community hall where the powwows will be held, and we all made paintings together. We had canvases, and it was just a wonderful day. My mother was there, my sister was there, and they learned about the ceremonial medicine wheel. And not to say that every elder knows about that. So I'm just happy to help out a little bit with that. And we did that wonderful day in Watonga. Coming to Minnesota today, I want to conclude the talk with an offering to this place. I was given the pipestone probably like in 88, and the chiefs were very impressed. The Cheyenne chiefs were very happy to have it. It was a big pipestone they brought. They gave it to us from here, Mitch Walking Elk. And then they gave me a song from Larry Long. You might all know Larry Long. And Amos Owen talked to me about it. And also Mitch sang the honor song. And they gave me that song. So when that happened, I had to do something about it. I was coming to the Walker to have a solo show. And so I made these monoprints just about 2 months ago just to come here and speak about it here. And these are all about the 38, these monoprints done recently. But in 1990, I would come to Minnesota for the first time and create Building Minnesota and put it on the river where these ceremonial leaders had lived without water and food, as was mentioned earlier by one of the panelists. And so we have the same way of worshiping. And so I knew they were thirsty, so I put them on the river, and I put them by the gold medal and Pillsbury granaries where the land was fought for because of the wheat. And we had, and this is Abraham Lincoln, and the day they were executed, December 26, 1862. And here we had a blessing of the pieces themselves. I work with students, middle school students, Native students, and we went to the graves. We met the chiefs. We did workshops at the Walker and the education department. We spent a lot of intensive time learning about what happened, which was important for me also. And so it's a 400-foot installation along the river, and it can be reconfigured and shown in museums or whatever is of interest. And so I want to give you the last picture of the middle school students, and then the song with Mitch Walking Elk and Amos Owen reading the names of the 40, and also Larry Long.
Ipidonicha, ta duta, ta oyate, hihashira koyagmani, maza bobdu, wahbe duta, sdodyeshni, khadaya mani, tate miaya, khadaya iankaha, doansa, Hepan, Shunkaska, Tukashitku Ichahadamani, Ite Duta, Kabadecha, Hepi, Mahbia Akanaji, Hanke Dakota, Chaske, Hanke Dakota, Tate Gara, He Inkpa, Hanke Dakota, Napeshni, Wakantanka, Tukan Shitku Ikie Ranaji, Ma Ka Akanaji, Wakute Wiya Yamani, Aichaha, Hotaniku, Chetan Hunku, Chankahada, Khadaya Hihuda, Oyate Agu, Wema Uti, Wakia Chistina. Tate Dihuni.
Ho, ho. Thanks.
So, before we start, could I ask a couple of Dakota people, whoever wants to come up here, to just come and maybe accept that and shake hands with Edgar if you want. I'm too moved to really start right away. So, if anybody cares to do that, I just need to a minute here, and you, it's if you'd like to. It's up to you. Otherwise, I'm going to go shake Edgar's hand.
Okay, well, that's fine.
All right.
Well, thanks for your work with the signs and stuff. I've been working with your sisters here too. Yeah. Thanks. That's good.
So, can you hear me? I'm not quite confident with this. Is this working? Yeah. You know, before I start, I just want to say that one of the reasons I wanted very much to talk to Edgar was that in some way, your works reach so far beyond you that you really probably, there's no way you can have an idea that it would cause me to move here. So I was looking out I visited Minneapolis around the time that this was up. And I'd lived in Montana and New Hampshire, but I'd always lived out, never lived in the city before, really. Grew up in Wahpeton. When most of the people I knew were Sisseton people, and my brother married into the Sisseton Oyate, and I didn't really know at the time what I was coming to Minneapolis for, but I saw this and I saw some commentary on it. I just saw photographs, I guess. I didn't really know what it was, but here's what I thought. I thought Minnesota is a place where I thought it was a permanent installation, that the state had purchased this to address its own history. I thought this was something that the state of Minnesota had done.
You were tripping.
I was tripping. Totally tripping. I mean, I knew it was by you, but I thought, wow, they have installed this to come to terms with their history. And I thought, that's a good place to live. And then it disappeared.
It's been like 30 years.
It's been like 30 years. It disappeared.
Yeah. I still have it in my studio. They never bought one thing. They never bought one piece. So
but that's what I thought. So thanks for changing my life. Moving. Maybe I would have moved here anyway, but I really so I'm just going to introduce myself. Louise Erdrich Indigene Kaz Jaganashimung Gaye Kinugunebik Indigo. ani nindanwe magani dok miigwich gibiajayik. Thank you for coming here. I can tell a lot of people are, well, we'll just say all relatives, and I'm really happy to see you all. I'm really thankful that you're here. And I know this was described at first as a conversation, but I had seen a shorter version of this, and I really wanted to find out more. So if I can ask questions for a while and then turn it over to people who may want to further ask questions. How long do we, excuse me, Brenda, how much?
You can talk as long as you want.
Oh, no.
Oh, no. Brenda, so I'm
No, that's
thinking.
good. That's good.
Oh, my gosh.
Well, hearing from the audience would be great. Having the audience speak.
I'm just going to get some coffee.
You have fried bread still, so.
Oh,
So I'd also like to thank Brenda and the National Museum of the American Indian and Kevin Gover and everyone who was up here this morning, early this afternoon, talking about activism, and all of the young people who have come here to talk about this. And it was moving to me and inspiring just to hear what people said, and that people are interested in this intersection between art and activism. So I'd like to start, if you don't mind, I'd like to kind of bring a lot of these questions to the contemporary issues, the issues that are going on right now.
okay.
So one of the first questions I have, or the first observations, is that you have taken on this enormous, beautiful task, but I think it's a task of beauty, which is renaming. And naming itself, or it's been called semiotic warfare. Naming is a violent act of colonization. I mean, it's a sort of it's ripping everything out. It's ripping the words out of people's hearts and out of the way people relate to their own world. And in taking this on, I mean, I wonder, and this is something I'm hoping people can take forward. If you meet with the commissioners, we're having the issue of B'dai of renaming it. And I think there's both a lot of positive, but there's going to be a lot of resistance. What can you tell us, give us some ideas of how people deal with the renaming, how Native people respond, what it does for people inside?
Well, for me, like it was like in Salt Lake City. I just listen. I listen to people. I guess I just want to be. I'm a friend that comes to town. You know, whether I'm in Zimbabwe or Bondoon or somewhere, and I listen and I help. I guess what needs to get done.
Yeah.
And so I just listen. I just do what. It's sort of like your grandma. You know, when grandma says something, you do it. You don't ask why. You don't have a discourse about why. Grandma said do this. This is how it goes. Or your instructor says do this. We just do it. So I'm really about, I guess, communities and listening to communities and then getting done what they said to do. Mm-hmm. You know, the name they say it is. I've been working with these two sisters here in Long Range, and they've got 2 signs now from what they said, and we made them the other day. Now they're here in town. You know, so it's just like whatever they say, just do what they say, and maybe no one else did it before. You know, but that didn't really matter. It's just important to make those steps to kind of helping the voice, I guess. And then people ask me too, well, how do you do all the international projects? And I just like to say it's simple. I just show up. You know, I just show up in Cape Town. I show up one day. And then I meet some people, meet some friends, meet some artists, share some food, and then before you know it, I have a studio space, or we have a show, we have a cooperative show in Sydney, and you know, we're in Shanghai, we're in Bandung, we're in Bali, Lombok, we're, you know, just being, connecting, you know, and I guess trying to wrap your arms around this world. I mean, just trying to hug this world, and it's a good place, so we need to all try to reach around it, I think, and so we're busy with that.
So do you look at this as an act of indigenizing the world in a way that?
Yeah, or just kind of interacting with what's already indigenous. Like even with ceremonial leaders, I've had so much training now. I can actually just exchange with medicine people. You know, we just exchange. We don't talk about each other. We just exchange ideas about how our practice. You know, I've been privileged that way after all my time in the ceremonies. But so I find that great now when I go somewhere. They'll bring me a medicine woman in Zimbabwe in some little hut. She's got this porcupine quills go up about 10 inches on a headdress, and I asked her, "What's that for?" She said, "That's for all the mean people that hate me because I'm spiritual. They're going to come talk about me." And I said, "I know what that's like. Yeah, they talk about you because you've got too much knowledge, you know." So, and it was cool. And so we just went back and forth about, you know, envy and all these things that happen when you know things. And so it's real easy to kind of make that exchange.
Yeah. And do you hear from people after you've gone? Like, do they keep contacting you? Hear more about what happened, or was there were there results? I mean, for instance, the Denver the reaction, that's incredible.
Yeah. Well, the hard thing about the public piece is, and it's hard on me, is that you make art as an artist, then you got to fight for it later.
Right.
And you already made it.
Can you describe what happened there?
You fought to make it, and then you're going to fight to keep it. And so that like breaks my back. I've been fighting to keep it. And I'm making something else, you know, and then I got to go fight the war to keep this other piece up from being demolished or something. And something they should have no respect to leave it alone, you know, but they don't. They're always messing with it. And so, but again, and here in Minneapolis too, the community with Building Minnesota, it's up to you what happens to it. You know, I can't move it. I can't move all the museums and move all this stuff, twist their arm. They don't listen to me. You know, so but the community, they have to listen to you. It's your museums that are here, and in Denver, it was the social media. They wanted to take Quill and just put it in a warehouse somewhere and put the dirt over it. You know, because they didn't like it. It was too real anyway when I made it, and so they've kind of had it on the back burner over here forever. And they made a brochure. It cost over $500,000, and I said, we need a brochure for it. And I brought out a Kinko's page with two-sided that folded. You know, that's what they made for it. You know, wow. So that was sort of like, well, we don't want to admit we got it. It was on the front lawn, but we don't want to admit it's here. So when it was time to make a new building, lovely, let's just demolish it and put it away. We got to move on. But anyway, the community came out. You came out, and really changed all of it. They got scared, man. And they changed it all around. Now it's in the front of the building. Now it's going to move to the front of the building. You know, it's going to be disappeared. Now it's in front of the building. So the community, when it's public art, it's for the community to decide about what it is. It's not the artists, you know. And so to fight for it again, that's what it takes from the people here in this room or in this town or in this county. All the way, and in Denver too. I hope they keep their word. I have to go back up there in January to see about moving it, and I hope they keep their word. But I think they will. But anyway, it's a big job to keep fighting these battles where you're still alive above ground. You can still fight these battles for yourself. Later on, someone else going to have to take over on that. But it's really about the community having the voice.
Can you describe how you and the community, I know that you decided to take some earth from the original. Yeah. And how you're going to move it? Yeah, they wanted, you know, they have to move it because they're building a new visitor center, and they have this big budget to build a new building on the site. I knew it had a prime site, and I wanted to hold on to it, but it wasn't possible to hold on to it. So we negotiated to move the wheel to the new front entrance, but I'm going to move 1 foot of the earth with it. You know, so I believe in all the prayers. I think they're so powerful. So people have cried and prayed on that land from the Sand Creek Memorial Run for years, like a decade. And so all those prayers have to be answered or kept, honored. So we're moving the dirt, and the director said, Edgar, I can't store that in a climate-controlled space. You know, like, I don't want you to put on white gloves and dig up the dirt. You know, like, it's just dirt. Put it in a big hole somewhere. I mean, put it in the garage or something. And outside, and so okay, we'll do that. So he was worried he had to put it in little boxes and put it up like Walter D. Maria and put it away somewhere, you know. But so we're going to move it,
and reinstall and then put the wheel back on top of it. So we'll have the original, I guess, hollow ground
Yeah.
to put the work back on. They kind of admitted that it must be special now because we're moving the earth. But before it didn't matter.
So that's interesting that act would be radical to tell a museum that this earth has become part of the art object, that this earth that people have cried on.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a profound statement.
And I was never there when they cried. I saw, they sent me pictures, but I never was there. But I know they did, so then we want to honor that attention they gave it,
Did people react to Building Minnesota I think I saw something.
Yeah, they brought prayer ties and eagle feathers, and we archived them, and so people came and I know they did things that I didn't see. They came and maybe shed tears because it's all about the names of your relatives. That's what's got to be respected. It's got to be the laws have to be respected. It was a loss, and so you got to respect the loss, and someone's got to do that publicly. Like I say, every day in this state, it's got to be, because if it's not, there's a big problem, man. You can't do that. Like the Vietnam War Memorial. Let's tear that down and move it somewhere else. Like, no, you got to move that thing anywhere. Like, there's all these memories and remembrances. So for me, the Building Minnesota is the same kind of piece. But it's for the families that are here and living now that have relatives that, which was mentioned earlier today, that passed because of that violence.
So that's something I think is it's so important to your work, and I find it that the historical research and the history you bring to each work is really something that becomes healing for people, and your choices of what to bring of that history, what words to bring. How do you make those choices?
Well, the research is key, certainly, but having some kind of a earthbound, spirit-bound relationship. Like when they brought me that rock and they brought me that song, the song in particular, I think the song still makes me very emotional. And that's my cousin singing, so he's prayed on my land in Oklahoma, and I know him, and so he told me you got to do something, Edgar. We got to make something. Here's that song. And I heard that song, and I realized I got to do something. I got to rise above it and make it. So it's got to be some kind of. That's why I go to the cave in Zimbabwe. That's why I would go up the cave and look at those drawings, and visit with the tribes. And when I was in Sumatra the other day, meeting the tribes again, and then seeing where that takes me to modern day. I have to have that guidance. And I do believe that after so much time working in the practice I have to follow the guides. So I'm waiting for the guide to tell me where to go, and then if they don't, then I don't make anything, no matter what it costs, what the budget is, or something. And I always say that's why we got so much bad art in the world. People don't turn them down. You're not guided to step away from it, because it's not like you don't need it, but someone else might have more than you. Yeah, they might have more of the intent than you do. See, another artist should do that piece, not you. Like if you don't feel compelled, you don't cry, you can't sleep at night. You got to make this thing. You should step off. Don't make it because they're going to pay you, because just you don't have it. You're not the person.
Right.
Or maybe there's no person. So you have to really listen to the guides that are there, and be aware of it. And so I think I'm kind of led along to these, and I don't make a whole lot of them,
Right.
I've just made one wheel and been in Minnesota and stuff. I don't make a lot of things like that. And I've been in Alaska. You went to Alaska.
Yeah,
so working in Alaska.
I came into Alaska and went to see the
native hosts
the native hosts, Lutik, Yupik, and it just went around the
all 12 tribes of Alaska, and
fantastic.
They're up in front of the Anchorage Museum. But I went up and saw the glaciers. I went and got blessed with that ice.
Yeah.
Which was an amazing moment, man. I touched that ice. They brought it up on board, and we could touch that ice from that glacier in the middle of that big bay, and that really helped me a lot. I still think that's a wonderful time. And so there again, I was kind of guided along to make that. Nothing you make every day like a painting or a drawing, but it's, it's a major effort to kind of internalize the pain too. I was in Anchorage. I made a piece for all the homeless Indians in Anchorage. I made one of the signs, and they have a bus shelter that costs $1 million, and everyone sleeps in it. But they have to have a bus shelter to catch the bus, but it's so cold, everyone lives in it. The Indians live in it, So I made them a sign and put it right by their bus shelter, and I had to sort of feel what that was. Then
What does the sign say?
It's one of the tribes that's there.
Yeah.
So it's just anyway, it's just that kind of the empathy that you've got to generate or allow yourself to generate. So you don't have endless empathy. So you gotta use it sparingly, I guess, right? Yeah.
That's interesting, because I think I think part of what your Earth renewal ceremony is about keeping the Earth going, but also it seems as though when you're talking about your guides that they help you generate that kind of emotional certainty that you can go into a situation or not, and I don't know, does it help you have that kind of compassion that
yeah oh yeah it does, yeah.
And if you don't, so you said if you don't have that drive or that guide to do a project, you step away.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah
and that's happened to you, that you stepped away.
Yeah. And then I think also the Earth renewal ceremony, what it does, I think is probably the most principle, is that it makes you home on this planet. And then if you're home on this planet, then you're home everywhere. Then if you're home everywhere, then you can kind of be receptive to what's there, right? You're not like a foreigner in the water off Bali, that the water that you didn't drink in Oklahoma that rained down the same clouds that, it's like the same water, so the same wind, the same moon, the same stars. So being home with that can allow that empathy, because then you can land somewhere in South Africa and a few days later you're kind of in the flow of that place, or in Zimbabwe, but it's the same rocks and same things that like home is.
It sometimes astonishes me when I'm in a ceremony of whatever kind, and there's a group of Native people who are praying to keep the earth together, who are doing the ceremonies to keep the earth together, and I think, and to keep things moving in a good way, and I think, do non-Native people even know that Native people are keeping the earth together?
No, and maybe they shouldn't know. Maybe they're not invited, but
yeah, it's.
But it'd be good if they were aware,
Yeah.
But I think that's a key point. What you mentioned is beautiful, in that keeping the earth together or fostering that. I think this is going to sound strange, but for me, that's the key perspective. Is just the earth in itself, and the people relate to each other too much. That we think people to people is the bottom line, and the people to people are fleeting here. Humans are fleeting, man. If humans are going to be gone here pretty quickly, it's not going to last very long in time. The earth will.
Yeah.
When the people are all gone and the earth moves a little bit closer to the sun, tilts a little bit, it's going to all be just a bunch of charred ash, no matter how much money you got. But the earth don't care. It's still having a good day. It's spinning. There'll be oceans here. Storms will come and go. Solstices will come and go. It didn't miss you at all.
No.
I did a talk at Princeton, an environmental conference. I told them the earth don't care about you. They said, oh no, really? It doesn't care about what? It cares about me. I said, what'd you do for it? You didn't do nothing for it. Like, why would it care about you? They all went into quantum. They all freaked out. Oh, I'm so depressed. The earth doesn't care about me. But it doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. The people together don't matter. It's the planet that matters. Your host matters, right? So what are you doing about the host? What do you care about the host at all? Anybody care? So that's where I am now. It's like just, the water and the land and what I said in the beginning, and so the animals, but the sky. And that's the focus. That should be the focus. Not each other so much. I mean, you'll always be fussing with each other and make some peace and get mad again or whatever. But it's the earth that you want to really consider.
Yeah.
What I like. What's kind of funny to me is that one of the film studios, it's called Universal, and it comes on whenever you watch the movie, and it comes on and the Earth's spinning and it says Universal. It's one planet out of the whole universe. That's Universal? Is that Universal? This one little planet out of all of them, we don't even know where it ends?
No, we don't know.
Universal. No, that's Earth. That's just this little Earth place. It's not. How's that universal? What's that universal about that? Like this, it's funny to me. It's really funny.
Well, what strikes me too is that our minds are not constructed in a way where we can grasp time. So you are working with time when you're working with your Earth renewal. We don't understand what time means. We can kind of visualize 1,000 years or back into recorded history and then beyond, but that's nothing. We can't grasp the amount of time that Earth has been here, and that's a tiny amount of time. It's it's a tiny amount of time, and we're seeing stars that aren't there because their light is just reaching us. And so, in your ceremony, and when you use your word, you come to these words. You come to these words through a sort of. It sounds almost as though you have guides and ceremonies. The choices of the words are so interesting to me. I mean, that's what I work with, of course. So that's when do they come and announce themselves? What do? Do you keep a notebook? Do you write things down?
With all my prints, I have a notebook. I used to have a bunch of little notes. Now I have my phone. I got a Note 8 now. So I write down stuff all the time. Like, when I get a feeling about something.
Right.
I was watching some show the other day, and they're talking about death and losing somebody, and they said they missed that person so much they'd be clawing the earth. And I wrote that down, clawing the earth. I said, wow, clawing the earth. The bodies. It was a Vietnam movie, a Vietnam documentary.
Yeah.
I said we buried him in Washington because if we buried him too close to the house, we'd be clawing the earth trying to get him back out. And so I wrote that down. It's in my phone. So it's going to come up somewhere. So it's those kind of things I'm hearing, and then I keep them, like you would, your notes, and then you move it into something else. So it's not so much ceremonial things, but it's all these, your life, you fold it into your work,
Do we want to talk, I guess?
Audience?
Do you want to go to the audience?
Yeah. Question. Kind of long-winded question about double standards in institutions. And I've never worked with institutions. Or kind of avoided it, so I don't know exactly the turmoil. Like when you say you got to go back and battle to keep your pieces. Like I don't want to hassle with that. But in undergrad and graduate school, I just saw those double standards, and that's why I avoid them. So, like when it comes to like Irwin's phenomenal perception and seeing is forgetting the thing one sees, and Rauschenberg's the aura in the work and all that stuff, like you would think through their own definition of what fine art is that they would already know you have to bring the dirt with it. And they would already know that they have to protect this stuff and keep its life and its aura going, So with that said, how do you deal with those double standards? Like what needs to change? Or do you see those double standards, I guess? I mean, I'm outside looking in, so you're inside.
Well, sometimes, like for Will, I actually had to go talk to the board of directors, like 40 people, and they flew me in. And it was they already voted against me. Like it was 11. Well, I guess this group was like 12, 11 to 1 or something. But it was a big group of people, and they said come in and talk to them, Edgar, because they said no, we can't do the piece. Then I gave a lecture, and then we went to dinner, and it was 11-1 for the piece. But you had to make the illusion a reality to the board. And they had to understand what it was going to be, or the value in the work. And so that's kind of what it takes, and that's a silly way to live, but you have to be, I guess, persuasive, or honestly, you have to move the mind of the people that have the power, so they can understand what the reality is.
So do you have to translate like the inherent indigenous or native values to their fine art language to defend it?
Yeah.
Otherwise, they just won't see it. Like you just have
they're
to spell
scared
it out
of it, and they
every
don't
time.
support it. Yeah, they're worried about the politics of it, and sometimes, like I'm saying, but it doesn't always last. I mean, it can last 10 years, then your value goes down, and then the insurrection rises up again, and so you got to go school them again. It's like, it's hard, man, and I don't want to go. I'd rather not. I wish someone else would do it. I wish you'd go. I don't want to go, man. I don't want to go. I'm worried right now. I delete their name off my phone. I delete the email. I don't want to see it. I don't want to see that. It's like a big hassle in my brain. I'm trying to live my life. Well, you got all these fires to put out, and so that's part of the work, is battling that stuff, like you said. You'll see it. It's coming your way.
I don't know.
I hope you will.
I'm not going to be in those doors. They have to pay me a lot more.
I'm going to refer you to it. I'm going to get you a
With
gig.
that said, do you put that in the billing for a piece? Like, I'm going to have to come back here in 10 years, fly here, and blah, blah. So this is for flights in 10 years. Like, do you put that in the...
Well, no, yeah, we have to do things like that. Yeah, I mean, there's a budget and extra budget, and I wish we had pain and suffering. I wish we had that budget. That'd be a big ass budget then. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Good.
Kenji knows. Kenji does public art. He knows the suffering about it.
Anybody else?
Your piece is not quite a public art definition. Your piece is more like really the source of the human ecology, and the human, being a human. It's like violence of struggle, I feel, when you talk about the struggle, She, as a minority, and then the Vietnam War Memorial, she was called as a cook and all these things.
I know, yeah.
In spite of that, piece is so striking, and you are event maker. Can I call you as an event maker rather than an art maker? Your ritual or ceremony, you say, that we lack. Our art history lacks a ceremony, and you bring back. I'm so thankful for that.
Well, thanks.
I publicly say that as a public artist and a public intellectual you are, not just a public artist. These are so important new roles for this democratic world of American history. And you come out of all that chaos. I really respect your heart and your strength to call it yourself as an artist. You're more than an artist, to me. It is a public intellectual you are too. So please, if you agree with me, that's my
that's interesting. And I think for me though, even as the artist, he's talking about the art, the spirit, and the making. But I've had that said in New York City. We have the Dead Indian stories, which are at the gallery. Some of those prints that are kind of similar, Genocide and Democracy. And the gallery director said, I thought they were like posters or something. And then they came, and she said, oh man, they're so sad and scary, these prints, and like I don't know what to do with these, and there was just a spirit in the paper and the ink, and these words were saying things, but it wasn't a poster. It wasn't from Kinko's, it was art. It was his heart on the wall, and she said she wasn't prepared for that. And some places send them back. They're like they're not what they thought they'd be. They're like saying something to people, and they're like, oh, we don't know how to deal with that. We got to put that in the back of the box because that's like something else. So it's that. So I think we're getting to the point with the plastic arts too, to where I think I'm getting there to where that has it emotes like the sculptures do a little bit, you know. It's taken 20 years, but I think it's kind of.
One thing I'd like to know, you've been in one thing I'd like to know, you have been in academic world, you're a professor, right? Native American studies, contextualized by academic world, and yet you pronounce yourself as an artist, more than that, somewhat. So I'd like to know your struggle between artisthood and the professorship, anyway. I think it's a good audience to hear that.
University.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's taken a long time to kind of. I'm not real comfortable as a professor, but I'm more comfortable than I have been, and so. But it's taken a lot of time to kind of to call a truce between me and the university in a way, you know. But actually, my wife and I are looking for a new job. So anyone knows any good jobs, we're available. You know, she has a PhD. I got an MFA, and I'm available. But that if you can bring your practice to the classroom, and your wits and your heart and soul, and then deliver it, and then have them assess it and come back with their response. And all my students, I take whatever they tell me. I say, I just want you to give me what you think and feel, and they say, you know, just give me what you feel, because that's how we want to deal with art, and just internalize it, engage it. And we're so afraid of it and so hierarchical, we think, oh, it's got to be up big stairs at the Met to go up there and go in there in New York City. Like you got to ascend the stairs to know art, you know. So I'm about the layperson knowing what art is, because we need the patrons. We got too many artists. We got too many bad art schools taking tuition from everybody, and we don't have patrons being educated to support the artists. That we're all struggling. We can't really make any money. We can't support our work. We need people that want to help us. So I don't teach any artists anymore. I just teach College of Art and Science students, and who might have, they're probably going to have money because they're in College of Arts and Sciences, so maybe they can help artists. I don't teach art history students or anybody. I just teach regular business majors and all that, and they know nothing, so it's hard work, because you got to start from zero every time. But another one of my charges, I guess. You know.
Well, you know, I wanted to ask you, as you were talking about art, I remembered back to the statue of it was in South Africa.
In Botha. Yeah.
Botha, and that you are a great supporter of people doing what I guess you'd call guerrilla art. So, do you work with people before they? I mean, there's a lot of this going on in the United States right now. A lot of statue pulling down. A lot of reconsideration of what these statues mean in terms of our history. And here in Minnesota, it's huge. I mean, we have a lot to pull down.
Right.
So I'm not going to, you know, we can't really go, let's go do this or that. But I'm just curious, like, do people come to you and say, I'm just thinking I might do.
Go put red paint on Abraham Lincoln's statue or something?
Something like that. I don't know.
Go for it, man. Yeah. But what I think, too, though, I've done a lot of interventions with racist statues, and I put my sign panels next to them. Like even with the Rodin, the tired guy leaning over and Trail of Tears. Like I couldn't have picked asked for a better stand-in. It kind of activates the signs. Yeah. So don't tear them all down because they're good to make fun of. Like don't take them all down.
Because that was a great costuming. That was a great.
He'll always look that way to me. I've never seen the real one. I never saw, but he looks that way to me. So they have a power that you can use.
Use that power.
Yeah, you got. It's the judo. You got to trip them with their own weight.
Yeah.
That's what you do.
Yeah.
Always. It's too big to fight. It's too big. You can't beat him up. You can trip him though real good. Yeah.
Words we should really think about around here. Yeah.
Do we have a last question for Louise and Edgar, or Louise or Edgar? I have a microphone. One more. Okay.
So much of art is controversial. Why then do so many museums keep from showing Native American art, hiding it away in back cupboards? Why exactly do you think that is?
Well, the museums have a board of directors, and then the museum director works for the board, and the curatorial works for the museum director, and curatorial picks the art, you know. So I know it's kind of crass to say, but boards are the wealthy. That's what boards are. Some boards you have to pay to get on them. You have to have like $50,000 to be a member. Maybe it's not written, but it's kind of understood. They don't put poor people on their boards. They want the board to buy them big buildings and buy them artworks and stuff. So then, of course, you got the wealthy with the checkbook, and then it's gonna have an effect with the whole food chain. So then you've got to get people to invest in native art, which doesn't have a lot of currency in the Euro strata of. But if you had something, you know, like what happened with Sam's work, which Sam's a buddy of mine, but it was a documenta. So that's like a big buzzword. Like, okay, we're all excited now. You know, we're all excited. It was that document. That doesn't mean it needs to be here, but it was that documentary. We all stop what we're doing and look up, you know, sit up straight. Like, oh, you know. And so with my project, I say Venice Biennale. Everyone sits up straight. Oh, you were at Venice Biennale. Oh, you must be worth something, you know. So there's all these sort of buzzword things that people get excited about. But a lot of native art doesn't have that buzzword. They're not accepted at Documenta. This first time, my former student, Cade Twist, was at Documenta, you know. So he's my student. And he was in my seminar in Native American Studies. But they don't have a lot of that cachet yet. So then how do you bring that to the museum elite and then have them take that to their board, and they can say, oh, they were at Documenta. Oh, we'll bring them in. Let's see. Let's have a drink or something, you know. You know, they were at Gary, Oklahoma with Tongo. No, we don't bring them in. No, what's that? How should I respect that? You know, or you know, other places here in Minnesota, some rural places. So then that's the problem. We don't have a lot of, you know, respect for what is being created. You know, so we've got to be able to establish that. But I think curatorial is so key, because curatorial can go to the board and make a case for something. And the boards have collection committees. And so when they buy something, someone's got to go make a case for it. Say, I want to buy this. They'll say, well, why? Why do you want to buy that? And then the curatorial team explains it, and then the board either believes them or doesn't believe them, you know, about it. And so educating the curatorial team, you know, which is kind of community people too, and so it's a big kind of complex food chain, but it takes understanding at every level, you know, and certainly you can do it without it. Like what Rory does at all my relations gallery, you know, it doesn't have a big giant food chain, and we can do something like tomorrow. Probably get together on something. We can do it tomorrow. Put it up right now, like, you know. And I'm working with Todd Boakley, and so I made signs last week. These young women helped me with some ideas, long distance, and now they're in the gallery tonight. And I made them like Thursday or whatever, you know. So we move quick, you know, in the other world, but the museum world moves a lot slower. You know, it has so many more kind of checks and balances. So, but I think the community has to demand representation, even though we don't have a lot of wealthy Native people everywhere. But they need to demand representation on the boards. Got to be, you know, to change things.
Do you have anything you want to add, Louise?
Well, I would just like to wrap it up with a big thank you to everyone who's thought to come and thought to participate and thought to be part of this. And
we have a gathering tonight.
That's what I was going to say.
The card's over there, but.
Well, I'm going to walk over here so we have a gathering tonight at Todd Boakley Gallery. The sign that you worked on is up on the side of the building. It's the bookstore, which is, I guess that's my activism. It's all the books, the bookstore. We're going to stay open. This is Edgar's book. It tells you it's by I thought it was beautifully done.
Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah. And it talks a lot about work that you will see. You'll see some representation of the series Neuf, is it?
Neuf, yeah.
Neuf, and you'll see that in the gallery. And please come and enjoy a less structured evening.
Yeah, there'll be a gallery talk at 7 o'clock, I think.
Right.
That's what it is.
Right.
Also, there's cards I want to give away for free up here. There's cards about other projects you're welcome to take, too.
And thanks to Todd Boakley in the back here. Thank you. Thank you. There's a lot of artists in the audience and a lot of wonderful people. I really appreciate being here. And thank you, Edgar.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thanks,
Thank you all. Thanks, Louise and Edgar, the panelists earlier this afternoon were fantastic. Thanks to the...
How many times do you hear that at the end of a talk? Take the fry bread.